Hey everybody, welcome back. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress with you. Man, I had a great conversation with Al Milgrom, but again, technology forced me to not be able to do a video. But good news, we're having a two-part conversation. Part one was recorded today. Al had to leave. You'll hear it. Dinner plans. It made us stop our conversation midway. Good news, though, we talked a lot about Al's Marvel days in particular. Really interesting stories about what happened to his art. He did covers with Jack Kirby, where he inked Kirby's covers. Fantastic story about that. Also, his own original art and a discovery that Gil Kane was poaching pages and covers from the Marvel offices. I'll let Al tell you the details. Gil Kane, are you kidding me? But great stuff about him and Jim Shooter and the Romitas, the senior Romitas, John Romita Sr. and Virginia Romita. Virginia, of course, ran the business side of Marvel as far as being the connection between the people upstairs and the creators. We've heard that before from Johnny Jr. when Johnny was last on the show. But really funny story that Milgrom had as a neighbor of the Romitas and how it impacted him delivering his work to Marvel. Lots of really great stuff. And of course, we started to get into Marvel Fanfare because that is Al's signature series. In fact, Marvel is finally publishing three different omnibuses of the entire run of Marvel Fanfare. And Al gives us great detail on the origins of it and a couple key early issues and why it was great. You don't have to convince me. I was one of those guys when it first hit the stands that this is something special and deserved the special treatment. And you got to understand, this was really one of the first Marvel direct market products that everybody just went crazy for. So really fun conversation with Al Milgrom, part one today on Word Balloon. Word Balloon is brought to you by The Legend of Kingdom Come. Discover the story behind the story. The Legend of Kingdom Come is the definitive documentary on Alex Ross and Mark Waid's groundbreaking 1996 masterpiece. Go behind the scenes with comic book legends, historians, and creators, including a few thoughts from me on how this modern myth changed the superhero genre forever. Order now on Blu-ray or digital download and own a piece of comic book history. Go to the website legendofkingdomcome.com. This August, the heroes aren't just on the page, they're in the room. It's Terrificon, Connecticut's #1 Comic-Con, landing at Mohegan Sun August 8th through the 10th. Meet your favorite comic book creators, TV stars, and movie legends. Shop exclusive art, rare comics, and geeky treasures you won't find anywhere else. Snap pictures with cosplay and join panels that go beyond the multiverse. I'll be hosting many of those panels. Don't miss your chance to be part of the action. Terrificon. Tickets available at Terrificon.com, but hurry and get yours before they vanish. Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Become a patron today. Patreon.com/wordballoon. For as little as $3 a month, you can really help Word Balloon keep going and get exclusive content you won't find anywhere else. Here's what you get. The Word Balloon Magazine, a digital publication packed with behind-the-scenes interviews, commentary, and insights from your favorite comic book creators, writers, and pop culture stars. And you can join the Word Balloon Book Club. Join Brian Bendis and me for a live monthly discussion of a hand-picked graphic novel. It's a great way to dig deeper into storytelling, art, and comic book history. Word Balloon has been a home for creator conversations since 2005. Your support helps cover production costs and keeps these interviews going strong. So if you love comics, creators, and long-form conversations, become a patron today. Be one of the League of Word Balloon listeners. Patreon.com/wordballoon. Before you hear the beginning of the interview, two things. One, this was a phone interview. Yes, phones. The original Word Balloon format, well before Skype, well before everything else. Like I said, we were having technical difficulties, me and Al. But also, I never properly introduced him. So you'll forgive me, but we start sort of in mid-conversation. I was explaining to him not to worry, that he wasn't the only person that I was having technical difficulties with. I mentioned that Bo Smith and I had to have a audio-only phone interview. And he's like, Bo Smith, why do I know that name? And I'm like, oh, he did X, Y, and Z. And he's like, you got to understand, John, once I started working in comics, I stopped reading them. That is the introductory line from Al Milgrom as we start this conversation on Word Balloon. Bo Smith, the writer, we had to do this on Tuesday because we were having trouble with technology.
I don't know if I know Bo, but I certainly know his name.
He wrote for DC in the 80s and 90s. He wrote Guy Gardner Warrior when they had Guy Gardner not as a Green Lantern. And he did a lot of...
by the way, I said but I had no idea what you're
all right, no worries. That's fine. Well, yeah.
Well, the thing about my career, John, is that once I started getting work steadily, I all but gave up reading comics. I
totally understand, Al. Yeah.
I was too busy working to actually, which is ironic because I love comics and I really enjoy reading them for the most part. And I sort of, for about 50 years, I gave up reading them because I was so busy drawing them or editing them. Then I would read the ones I edited. Yeah. So it's crazy. But it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally understand. And frankly, I ask guys, I'm in my 60s now, so I ask guys our age and my age and older, like, are you still able to read for enjoyment? What's that?
Yeah. I said, you still got all your hair.
Yeah, I do still have all my hair. I got that going for me.
You're very jealous. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm sorry, I interrupted. You're in your 60s.
No, I was just going to say that I do ask creators all the time, like, do you still read, or even can you read a comic that you used to do, or is it like an old girlfriend that, you're like, I don't want to, that brings up too many sad memories that I'm not doing it anymore.
I know. I'm relatively proud of my career and my output, and
sure.
I have no illusions about my talent. I'm a solid storyteller. I'm not a great artist. I'm not a great drawer. I probably was really better suited for inking, but I didn't want to be just an inker. No offense to inkers, who I certainly admire and respect all the hard work they do, and I did for that matter. But I did want to pencil, and and I had a respectable career as a penciler, and ironically, my best thing were probably my covers, where I could take a little bit more time and put a little bit more effort and come up with a single image that was eye-catching, and as a result, I had a very good career doing covers mostly for Marvel, but even for DC for a stretch there, and lucky for me, because the covers are the most valuable pieces of artwork you can have, and nowadays, I mean, the prices for original artwork have gone quite high, I just had a cover which sold at Heritage Auctions for $1 million. Unfortunately,
wow.
I never got the original back, so it was not my million. I didn't get the million.
Oh,
yeah,
wow,
right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, not as sorry as I am.
Yeah, I bet. Do you still do commissions though, and do you do recreations?
Yeah, I do commissions. I do shows. I sign autographs. I do commissions. I do recreations. People want because again, I did a lot of covers, and if I say so myself, some pretty good covers. And somebody just this week commissioned me to do a recreation of a Hulk cover that I did, where it's Hulk 250, where he's facing Silver Surfer on the cover, and it's a nice. I never got that one back either, as a matter of fact. The sad thing was, Shooter finally got it. He got the company to agree to return originals to the artist, which was great. And but apparently, they would send me envelopes full of original artwork, periodically from the office. Yeah. Or sometimes if I went in, I'd pick them up in person. But apparently there were people, I don't know if it was the art return people or people drifting through the office or Gil Kane or what, but there were, because Gil Kane was infamous for making off with other people's artwork and selling it.
Wow.
And before his family decides to sue me, I have first-person experience in that regard. Wow. Where he was selling original artwork that Starlin and I had done at a convention, and Starlin, some kid came up to Jim and wanted him to autograph a page of his artwork that we had done, And Jim said, where did you get this? I never got this job back. And he said, well, I bought it from this dealer over here. And Jim did not take it from this kid. And he was a kid. He was not, he was a young, very young guy. And but he went over to the dealer's table and he said, where did you get these? He says, oh, I just bought them from Gil Kane. And he said, well, they're not Gil's artwork. I never got them back. They're mine. And he took them from the dealer. And there are other instances I could cite, but it's unfortunate. But apparently Gil, who was one of the most gifted pencilers in the history of the industry, apparently was not making a living that he felt was sufficient, and so he would abscond with other people's work.
That's insane. I've never heard that before, and I appreciate the story.
It's very common now. It's common knowledge in the industry.
Wow. Well, again, that's why I appreciate these conversations with you guys to set the record straight, frankly. And that's really it's a shame. Hey, Al, you've worked with complicated people, Vinnie Coletta, Jim Shooter himself, and now this Gil Kane story. So I get it, and it's sad when you hear stories like that, but there's good stories as well. Thankfully.
Oh, of course.
Did you?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, did you get along with Shooter?
Yes, I got along very well with Jim. We were friends. He was a mentor, because he hired me once. I had an editorial job at DC for 1 year.
What did you do at DC before we get to Jim? Yeah, what'd you do?
Oh, I was an editor.
Yeah, but I'm saying what titles?
Oh God, I don't remember. Batman Family.
Okay, sure.
I think Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes.
Okay, yeah.
Wait, what else? There were others.
Well, you're thinking, Al, that's my sweet spot. I read Batman Family, and I read Superboy and the Legion. That's great stuff, man. I know you're editing, but still.
I thought so. And can't remember. Did I do the Karate Kid? You know what? It's been so long, I can't even. Yeah, he briefly had his own title. I know.
I remember. Yeah, I remember all this, Al. Absolutely. I was 35-cent era, man. Come on.
Well, what happened was I was working at Marvel and, freelance. Yeah. And I was doing a lot of covers for Marvel, including, and this was, I assume, a little-known fact, Jerry Conway, during his 1 month as editor-in-chief, I think it wasn't much longer than that, I don't think.
Yeah.
And, but he snagged me at the office one day. He says, Al, listen, Kirby's coming back from DC, and we want to have him do like a lot of covers like he did in the old days, like where he did virtually every cover, for the Marvel line. Sure. As well as doing 2 or 3 books a month, whatever the heck he was doing. And he said, we'd like you to do cover sketches for him. And I said, well, why on earth would you need me to do cover sketches for Jack Kirby, who's the greatest comic book artist in the history of the business, arguably? And he said, well, Jack's out in L.A. and you're here, and if Jack was going to do them himself, we'd have to ship mountains of Xeroxes out to the West Coast, and then Jack would have to waste his time going through each issue to find a good cover scene, and then he'd have to, draw it and send it back to us. And he says, if you do cover sketches for him, we can eliminate all that shipping costs as well as wasting Jack's time. And I said, well, what about my time? And he says, ha, ha, ha. And I said, no, you're right. And I said, oh, well, listen, I'm honored that you would ask me, and I will do it. But I'd like to, my one condition is I'd like to ink the covers of the books that Jack does based on my cover sketches. And he said, yeah, we like your inking too, so that was an interesting gig for a while. And by the way, apparently Jack's deal with Marvel at the time was he got all his originals back, like the inker didn't get any originals.
Wow.
At least I know I didn't get any of my covers back that I inked over him.
Yeah.
And the deal was in those days that generally the inker would get 1/3 of the covers that he did over a specific penciler.
Okay.
But the good news is that when Shooter took the entire editorial staff out to San Diego one year. Kirby had a table set up where he was selling originals, and lo and behold, there on this table were a bunch of the ones that I had both done the cover sketches for and inked, of course. And I assume this was his son who was manning the booth. And I said, "Oh man, I'd really like to get some of these." And he says, "Well, they're $100 each." So if you can imagine buying a Kirby cover for $100.
Yeah. Back then.
And I said, "Oh wow, that's." I said, I actually am the inker. I was the inker on these covers, and I did the cover sketches for Jack. And he said, "Oh, you were the inker?" I don't think he understood the cover sketch concept, but
sure.
He said, "Well, just wait here a minute." And he, went off into the bowels of the San Diego Comic-Con. And when he came back, he said, "Listen, my dad said for you $60 a cover." So I said,
wow.
done and done. And I bought everyone that I could afford at the time, which was many of them. And so I now have a bunch of my Kirby originals that I inked that I got for $60 each.
Oh my God, Al. That's wonderful. My God. Would you ever go ahead? I'm sorry. I'm stepping on you. Please.
Well, it helps make up a little bit for the $1 million I didn't get for the Amazing Spider-Man.
I would think so. Well, Al, would you part with those in an auction today, or is that your inheritance for your family?
You never say never. Because of course I am. Well, I was unemployed. Now I like to think of myself as retired.
Okay.
And if I needed the money, I would definitely. I'm sentimental about this stuff, but
sure.
I'm 75, and my parents both died my dad died very young at 47.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wow.
And my mom, I think, was in her mid to late 70s when she died. And I've had, because of my dad's history, my doctor said, let's get you a stress test because your family history. And since the time he suggested that, and I went, and got on a treadmill and ran my guts out,
good.
And he detected a blockage. So since then, I've had 3 stents in coronary arteries and 1 angioplasty besides. So, I'm still here. I feel fine. I've got no major problems, but, I realize that I am not immortal, and in which case, I would be better suited to get that stuff sold than my family would.
I understand.
And I've told them,
absolutely.
They've said, well, we don't know what the stuff's worth. How are we going to deal with it? And I said, listen, I got a guy at Heritage. You just send it to him, and he'll put it up for auction, and it'll get what it'll get, that kind of thing. But they seem to think that there's more to it than that, but really there's not. So, so I do have those things, and they'll either, support me through my golden years.
Yes.
Or they'll be a boon to my offspring.
That's great, man. That's wonderful. Well, I'm really glad that you were able to get that stuff back and at a certainly a reasonable price. My God.
Yeah, I can't complain.
Al, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I always think of go ahead. I'm sorry. I keep stepping on you.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and I did get my sketches back also.
I was going to ask. Okay, very cool.
Yeah, so I've got those too. Yeah. And
I would think that's even more maybe exciting for someone to buy at auction to get your original cover sketch and the finished thing with you and Kirby. I would think that's a great package deal, or even separately. I don't know.
Well, yes, my attitude is I prefer selling them separately because they'd probably say, well, I'll pay this much for this Kirby cover, but they should throw in the sketch. And my attitude is no way. Pay separately for the sketch. And I'm not sure if putting the sketch up with the cover would enhance the price at all. So I'd rather put it up separately. Yeah, I did sell one of my Captain Marvel covers to a collector who's a big fan of mine and Jim Starlin's. I won't mention his name, but he was hounding me for years to get it, and he made me a very nice offer. And he said, but I want the cover sketch too, because he knew I had done a cover sketch for myself on that one. And so I sort of grudgingly, reluctantly let him have that too.
Well, I hope you got a good price regardless, for the package.
I was satisfied with it. Again,
okay.
You can never tell. I mean, over the years, I did part with a number of covers that I had done.
Sure.
For what were decent prices at the time, but now I would get double, triple, maybe for a lot of these covers. And so, but I needed the money, so I couldn't. It's not like, oh well, I'm doing fine, but I'll wait till these go up more. And by the way, I never imagined the prices they're realizing for some of the stuff nowadays. Mine or other artists as well, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's not like I was a canny, clever businessman. Like, oh yeah, I'll keep these until they really go up. No, it was dumb luck. I was working like crazy at Marvel back in the day.
Yeah.
And I was literally too busy to be concerned with selling the originals, which would have gone for much, much less in those days. The Buscema brothers, they had an agent who would come in and just take these reams of original artwork home with them and sell them. And I think they were getting 10, 20, 30 bucks a page, but they did so much that it was a nice little, side hustle for them.
Sure.
And now, of course, you can get much, much higher prices, particularly for John's work, but Sal's no slouch. And,
100%.
But on the other hand, John would not have lived to enjoy these higher prices because he's gone. So, you have to figure, if they're going to go up and up and up forever, which I'm not sure of, you still, if you want to see any profit from it, you have to, sort of draw a line and say, I can't count on, living to 120. So maybe I better sell it now.
I hear you, Al. Absolutely. Again, I'm thrilled that you do have stuff and that you are in that position to make those decisions. But you're right. Since COVID, the artwork prices have just gone crazy. And
I know.
As I'm sure you do, again, because you're a player. You've got stuff that people want. That's wonderful, man. Mentioning Sal, I'm learning and of course respect the importance of inkers. When Shooter was the editor, because I always felt Sal represented a real Marvel house style in the way that he drew. John did too, but I wonder if that was your inking, and also not only your inking, but also was that any sort of edict from Shooter that because again, it just seemed like there was this kind of style during the 80s, and I felt like Sal was one of the poster childs for that effect. Am I miscrediting him, and really it's your embellishment that made it that Marvel style?
Well, honestly, I did not ink that much of either of their work.
Oh.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I remember I inked 2 consecutive issues of Red Sonja. One was John's breakdowns, and the other one was Sal's. And I sort of tried to get, at the time, Frank Thorne was doing the book.
Sure,
so
absolutely.
I purposely tried to give the Sonja's face, at least, some of that Frank Thorne look to them. I don't know how successful I was, but I tried. And so I inked those. I inked, here and there, I inked an issue by Sal. I can't remember specifically what. I know there was we had a title late in my career at Marvel called Journey into Mystery, which was, reviving that old title that Thor first appeared in. And it did not have Thor in it. It had Odin, and it had Sif, and it had some of the other Asgardians, I think. But Sal did breakdowns for that, and I inked one or two of those, I guess, and a few covers here or there. And whenever, I was one of these, if there's an emergency, call Al and he'll help us out, guys.
Okay.
Whenever, and if a book was getting late and they needed, the inker of record was overwhelmed as the penciler, got a bunch of pages in at once. And if the deadline was too tight, then they would hire, guys to help out on the inking end of it often. And I was one of those guys. And, Joe Rubenstein did a lot of that. And,
yes.
I feel like maybe, Sam De La Rosa would pitch in on stuff. And now, more recently, Scott Hanna. Scott's like a machine. He turns stuff out so fast. He's very, very good. I've gotten to know him a little bit, and we see each other at shows all the time now. And he was always willing to jump in and help out. And if there was a Sal job and whoever was the scheduled inker got into a bind towards the end, then they would often call me. I had an extra advantage that many of the other inkers did not have. What do you think that was? I'm just kidding. You don't know.
Speed. I'm guessing speed. But tell me.
No, speed. No. I was decently quick. I was fast enough. I was no Vinnie Coletta, but I could do stuff quickly if I had to. And, the nature of the business in those days was the more work you did, the more money you made.
Of course.
Before royalties or incentives or whatever, the thing was. No, I live on Long Island, and I'm about a 15-minute drive away from where John and Virginia Romita live.
Oh, there you go. Sure. Keep going.
And
tell the people. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I could get a package at 10 a.m. from FedEx. I could work all day long. I don't know what I was doing up at 10 a.m. I'm a night person, but if it was an emergency and they needed it, I would get up. And I'd work all day and have dinner with my family, and then I would work literally all night. So I could get the equivalent of 2 full days' work in, and then I could drive over at their house at 6:30 in the morning because they drove into the city every day.
Sure.
And I would sneak like a sneak thief in the night. I would go to their back door, and I'd put an envelope in the back door and leave it for them. And then as they walked out in the morning, Milgrom was here again. And they would drive it into the city for me. And so I was the beneficiary of the Romita Express.
That is so funny. That's fantastic, man. Hilarious.
There you go. It was great. Huh?
No,
go ahead.
Keep going. No, keep going. It was great.
It was great, except on those occasions when they didn't tell me they were going to be out of town. I go and, just as a matter of course, if I couldn't make it to FedEx, or if I needed the extra 8 hours of working all through the night, before I got the pages done to send in.
Yeah.
So then I go leave the pages, and then the next day I'd get a call from the office, where are those pages? And I said, what do you mean? I left them at the Romitas. The Romitas are in France.
Oh, God.
Oh, no. And then I'd have to, drive over there. And, once or twice I would actually go over to their house, retrieve the pages, and then drive into the city, which was a nightmare because driving into New York is always a nightmare. And usually I got the word late enough in the day that I couldn't. I remember one time I'm sitting in traffic trying to, the Long Island Expressway maybe, and trying to get into Midtown, and I'm watching the clock. And it's 4:30. It's 4:45. I'm stuck in bumper to bumper traffic. And I finally just got off and I turned back and I went home and I FedExed the stuff that night, so they got it the next morning. So that happened, not that often, but enough times that it just. I said, John, can you let me know if you're not gonna be home, because I'm always dropping stuff off. He said, oh God, I didn't even think of it, Al. And I'm going like, come on, I'm there every day. You got to think of anything. And one time Virginia actually sort of yelled at me. And at the time she was the production manager, right?
Yes.
So essentially she was in charge in making sure that all the books were on time,
Sure.
you know, and cracking the whip on the editors, and who then would crack the whip on their freelancers. But she grabbed me in the hall and she said, "Alan, you know, you don't have to drop the pages at our house every day. Marvel will pay for the FedEx bills," which I knew. I mean, I had Marvel's account number for FedEx.
I understand.
And I said, you know, Virginia, I'm not trying to be cheap or save anybody money. Here's not the company, certainly, and certainly not me. I get no benefit. I said, but you're the production manager. If they send me a bunch of these pages and they're, you know, the book's in danger of missing shipping, or, you know, we get all kinds of penalties, and, you know, you know, the engravers would charge us if books were late. The printer would charge us if books were late. The damn distributors, I think, probably charge us if books were late. So that's why they hired Shooter ultimately, was to get everything running on time, because, you know, by this time it had degenerated. They had an editor-in-chief, but also they had a bunch of writer-editors, like guys who had been editor-in-chief. And then they said, this is a thankless job, and I don't want to do it, but I'll continue to write several books a month, which I will edit myself. And Marvel apparently went along with that. And so, you know, it's not easy to crack the whip on your own back. So, you know, the books were getting later and later, and they were missing shipping, and they were slotting in reprint editions, which were, you know, Marvel, the history of Marvel had not been that long. They'd only been doing the books for 10 years or so. Right. And so there was, you know, they're reprinting stuff that, you know, came out 3 years ago or something. It was insane. But they had to get something out there on the monthly schedule.
Of course.
So I said, Virginia, I'm helping you. You're the production manager. You know, if they asked me to do 4 pages, and I did them, you know, like overnight virtually, and I'm delivering to you so that the book will not, you know, miss any of these deadlines.
Certainly.
And she said, well, yeah, I don't see why you can't do it. You know, she would just, I mean, she was a bright woman. It's not like she didn't understand what I was saying. But I think she just didn't like the idea that I was skulking around her backyard in the middle of the night, you know, dropping pages off. And so I went to see John later, and I said, John, listen, Virginia just yelled at me. And she was tough stuff, too. And I said, you know, she yelled at me because I keep, you know, putting pages in your back door. And he looked at me kind of askance, and he said, well, what difference does it make? We're driving in anyway. You know, it's nothing for us to carry an envelope. I said, okay. He said, you know what, just keep doing it. Don't worry about it, Alan. So I said, okay, thanks, John. So I did. I just ignored Virginia, and I'm sure she probably was thinking dark thoughts about me, but, it helped out a lot of editors and a lot of deadline binds. So, you know, and that's why when you see, you know, credits on the books where it says, it says so-and-so, and then it'll list maybe 3 other people, and I'll usually be one of them. So anyway,
great,
so that was my ace in the hole. I had the Romita Express delivering pages for me 5 days a week.
That's fantastic. Now, am I right? Because obviously you knew I was going to ask you about Marvel Fanfare. And
okay. I did not know that.
Well, you should have, because obviously
okay.
You'll forgive me, Al, but honestly, that was my introduction to you beyond the credits, because of course you'd have that great, almost like Rod Serling title page or first page of you introducing the book, which I thought was really classy, and it really added to the honestly, and also the fact that it was a direct market book. You know, it wasn't, as I remember it, I don't know if it was also a newsstand product, but regardless, it was my understanding. Okay, it wasn't. There you go. And so yeah, it was just like that. Really, part of the whole direct market thing was suddenly, wow, I'm in a comic book store, and I'm, as opposed to going to 7-Eleven or the local candy store and buying comics. This is great. And Marvel Fanfare, because of the material, was really exciting. Am I wrong to assume that maybe some of the stuff was stuff that was waiting in case there was a need for a fill-in? How did Marvel Fanfare start? Tell me how it started.
Okay, I will. And by the way, this is not an exclusive because I'm probably told
I know you have.
5 other podcasters this story. So I'm sorry if it doesn't seem completely fresh. However, yes. Here's what happened. The direct market was starting to develop. Thanks greatly to there was a guy named Phil Suling.
Yes, sir.
Who used to run the New York Comic Con back in the day, and he was a big comic fan, and I think he sort of had a side hustle where he would supply certain people with with comics, and there was no direct market yet, but it was the beginnings of the direct market. And he was acting, I believe, as sort of a wholesaler, to some of the, local New York, places that were comic centric. So, and what happened was he went to the publishers and he said, look, there's a need for this stuff. Your regular distributors are not doing the greatest job in the world, and they're ripping you off. I'll explain that later. But he said, I have people who are comic, fans, and they want them. And Marvel in particular at the time was having very poor distribution. When they started out, they were being distributed by DC's distribution company.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Right. And it was.
And they only limited them. They only limited them to like 8 titles or something. That's why we'd have the double features in Tales of Suspense and the other books.
They couldn't expand the number of titles they had. Exactly.
Yeah.
It was the name of the outfit. It was Independent News, and they distributed the DC comics and other magazines, I believe, and Mad Magazine, I think.
Yep.
And honestly, considering the fact that Marvel was in a small way a competitor of DC's,
sure.
I'm surprised they even deigned to distribute the Marvel books. I mean, if they decided not to, Marvel would have been dead in the water, And Marvel, they were subsisting. They published, those titles. They had the monster magazines, Tales of Suspense, Strange Tales, Journey into Mystery, etc. And they were doing really. I was a superhero guy, so I never looked at those books. I might leaf through them on the newsstand, and I didn't know who Stan Lee was or Jack Kirby or Ditko. And, and the material was not what interested me or appealed to me. Although years later, I actually sort of started collecting that stuff because they're great. They're, those same talents that made the superheroes so great were doing these wonderful monster stories, with very, very good O. Henry or Rod Serling type endings. By the way, that was nice of you to compare me to Rod Serling, but I'm actually much funnier than he was. But but what happened was so we had the the direct market just starting. I think possibly the Dazzler might have been a direct market only publication.
I think you're right.
And so I went to Shooter. Oh, and the other thing was Shooter had told me that we did not make money on our advertising. And I said, well, what is that? How is that even humanly possible? I mean, you're printing all, there's every single month, every book we do, they had, they would print up the ads in a separate signature, that is to say a separate batch of pages that they could then slide into every title that we did, right?
100%.
Yeah. So whatever Marvel's books were selling, maybe one of them was not selling great, but the whole line the line as a whole was selling, pretty impressive numbers, I assume, even with the monster stuff. And so I said, if we're not making money, because most publishing, magazines, periodicals, that's where they made their money. If they had, the higher the circulation, the higher they could charge for their ads.
Yeah.
So Time Magazine and Vogue and Elle and Life and whoever had ads in their magazines, if their circulation was 3 million, they could charge this much money, and if it was 2.5 million, a little less. I don't think the comics worked on that formula, and that's so you had the cheapest, lowest level products for sale. Whoopee cushions, X-ray specs,
right?
Inflatable dinosaurs. Get a chest with there'd be 100 Roman soldiers or 100 cowboys or 100 Indians or whatever they had
for $1. Yeah,
and of course, let's not forget sea monkeys.
Of course.
So, so I said, well, Jim, what is I don't understand. What's the point? He says, well, they do pay us, and also it saves us from having to fill those empty pages with editorial material. In other words, you'd have to pay a writer, a penciler, an inker, a letterer, a colorist to do 8 more story pages every issue, and that would be very expensive. So you're not paying for those. I think it was about 8 pages worth, of material, 8 to 10, something like that.
Wow.
And then you get, but you get some money coming in from the advertisers, and you wouldn't have to pay a bunch of freelancers to do stuff to fill the books.
I get it.
And I said, yeah, I got it too. And I said, being a thoughtful guy, I said, one time I mulled it over a little bit, and I went back to Jim. I said, Jim, listen, just out of curiosity, what would we have to charge if we did a comic for this, this starting up, direct market going on here, and if it had no ads and it was all editorial material, and maybe printed on better paper, and maybe we could get better coloring, and I'd want to pay the freelancers extra, but what would be a ballpark figure for a cover price? And he said, oh yeah, that's a good question. Let me go talk to the money people. So apparently we had a race of green people made out of paper living on the upper floors. And he came back down sometime later, and he says, Al, I think they said, I think it was $1.25 they came up with for a cover price.
Okay. And that's compared to 35 cents or so for the average comic that day?
I don't remember the time frame.
No problem. All good. Keep going.
You can look it up.
Yeah, I'll look it up. Keep going.
And let your listeners know. But I think it was probably 70 cents or 75 by then, maybe.
Okay.
Possibly. Okay. So it was a good, huge jump in cover price. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I honestly, I don't think it was an intellectual exercise. I don't think I planned on doing a book, but I wanted to know, what we would have to think about if we decided to do one. And, sometime later, Jim poked his nose in my office and he said, Al, when are we going to do that book? And I said, what book? He says, the one with no ads for the direct market. I said, I said, I ain't got no book, So I sat down, I came up with a title, which was, of course, Marvel Fanfare, fair for the fans, obviously. And, the better paper stock, slick paper stock. So the color was more, vibrant and vivid. And, and I convinced them they should pay the creative people rate and a half. So whatever their rates were, they would get an additional 50% of that.
Wow.
And yes, it was a very good deal at the time. And that was for everybody. It was for the writer, penciler, inker, letterer, and colorist. And at some point, those crinkly money people upstairs said, why are we paying the letterers rate and a half? It's exactly the same job. There's nothing fancier about the lettering. It's just lettering. And so they forced us to go back to giving them just their regular rate. So I felt bad about it because, letterers they have a very, unique and rare talent, and they're good at their jobs, and they're designers, and many of them went to art school, and have all kinds of other graphic skills and stuff, but I fought it as best I could, which was not at all. And so they took away that part of it. Then I had to scramble because they wanted to put it on, like they were really hot to put it on the schedule for some reason, maybe just because they thought that it would be a good way to test that direct market. So I went around and I found some material that I thought would make a good, good first issue for Fanfare. I think it was an issue of Marvel Team Up, which became the lead story in the first issue. And that was, of course, Claremont and Michael Golden doing a Spider-Man and the X-Men and Kazar in the Savage Land.
Yeah.
And they had it. It was sitting in the drawer, complete. It was written, penciled, inked, and lead, and everything was done. And, of course, Michael Golden is like a genius.
Yes.
And just one of the best new talents that had come along in a while. And I don't remember who the editor was, but I said, "Hey, what are you doing with his job?" And he says, "Oh, they're Claremont and Golden are so busy we can't get them to do the other issues. It's a 4-part story, and it's already plotted." I said, "Do you mind if I take it?" And they said, "Nah, we're never going to be able to get them to do it." I said, "Okay." And I took it, and did they also do the second issue? I think they did.
Yes.
You would remember better than I.
I was looking on Marvel Unlimited, and yes. I'll
so
confirm that. By the way, real fast, the average price of the Marvel comics was 60 cents when Fanfare was $1.25. So there
this
you go.
This is more than double.
Yeah. Keep going, though.
I will. I just had to grab a sip of my soda. So anyway, so 60 cents and $1.25 was more than double. So that's a heck of a boost in price, obviously. So anyway, I took those 2 jobs, and they said, "Well, you're not going to be able to use them." I said, "These guys are, Chris already plotted the whole 4-part series." I said, "We already got the plot." I said, "We got a lot of other good artists. I'm not saying Michael Golden isn't great. He is great. But you know what? Dave Cockrum, who was the creator of the new X-Men, the new super popular X-Men, hey, he's available. I'm going to get him to do the next chapter." And then I discovered a guy named Paul Smith. I'm not taking too much credit for that because he sent in samples, and his drawing was terrific. He was working as a professional in animation in some capacity. I never did know what he did, I don't think. But he sent in samples, but they were like, figure drawings, no storytelling, no background, no multi-panel pages, stuff like that.
Sure.
But clearly he could draw like a son of a gun. So I said, "Look, Paul," I got hold of him on the phone. I said, "I like your samples. I'd like to send you a plot, to do a couple of sample pages." And he says, "Well, is it a new plot or is it something that, that's already been done?" I said, "No, it would be something, that's already done. And we just keep some around to test people." He said, "Look, I'm a professional. Why don't you send me a new story and I'll draw it. And if you like it, you can use it. And if you don't, then we'll just, we'll cut it off in mid-job and, no harm, no foul." I said, "That's perfectly reasonable. I know where you're coming from. I don't like working for free either, doing samples." So, I sent him a nice Roger McKenzie Daredevil script, I believe it was, or plot, I should say. And he did it, and it looked great. I had a couple little caveats, a couple things I wasn't totally happy with about the storytelling, and I called him up and I said, "Listen, I think this could have been better. I think you could have done this a little differently." I said, "But none of this is worth redoing because the job is just fine. And I'm going to pay you for it." And he said, "Oh, well, good. I appreciate that." I said, yeah, I'm not I'm not that kind of an editor, which probably would have driven Shooter crazy if he'd known I said that. But, if it was good enough, what is it they say nowadays? The perfect is the enemy of the good. I wasn't trying for perfection. I wanted to do good comic books. If you got a little closer to perfection one month than the other, great. But if you did a good comic with with good storytelling, I was happy enough. So he did the job. It was great. And then I called him up. I said, "Hey, look, Paul, we're doing this multi-issue thing for Fanfare. Would you be interested in doing the 4th chapter?" And he said, "Oh yeah, sure, great." And sure enough, he did, and he did a terrific job on it. Yeah. I don't remember who inked it. Was it Wyatt?
While we're talking.
Yeah, you go ahead and do that. I can't.
But
I don't
keep talking, and then I'll tell you.
Yeah, I will. Anyway, so so I got that, and we were off and running. And I had Ed Hannigan, by the way, design the logo of the book. He did one that I thought was sort of a little too flowery, but it was like, very ornate lettering, and it had banners and trumpets, like a fanfare, ta 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 ta, that sort of thing. And but I liked this one better. It was cleaner and simpler, and I didn't want it. I thought the trumpets and banners would look a little weird issue after issue. So I opted for the one we use. And I've done. Hold on one second, John. My wife is telling me.
My son, no problem.
10 minutes? Oh, John, I may have to cut this short. I don't know if you want to take it up. We're leaving for dinner.
Oh, no
fairly
problem.
soon. Okay.
Well, I'll tell you. And listen, let's do this. First of all, Terry Austin was Paul's inker on that issue.
Okay. Oh, all right. Yeah, Terry was one of my go-to good guys. Yeah.
And there you go.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. Can we talk later this week during the day, possibly?
Yeah, possibly, or maybe tomorrow.
Okay. I'm trying to think. I think I'm good tomorrow during the day. Yes, I am.
Okay.
So if you want to do this again,
you want to try for around 3-ish, maybe?
Sure, 3 your time. That'd be great.
Okay, let's try that. And
wonderful.
Okay, and so I got Terry to ink it, and Terry is another guy I kind of sort of helped in get in the business. He's another fellow Michigander originally. He's from Michigan, and
okay.
he came in with samples, and he brought them up to Marvel, and everybody looked at him and they said, "Oh yeah, very nice," but nobody gave him anything to do. And I felt sorry for him because he's standing there looking, woebegone and forlorn because he didn't immediately get work. And I said, "Hey, Terry," I didn't know him, I don't think, from Michigan. But I said, "Look, why don't we go over to Continuity?" It's Neil Adams' studio with Dick Giordano. And, they often have jobs for talented people such as yourself. And if nothing else, you can hang out there a little bit, get to know some of the guys, blah, blah, blah. So we walked over to Neil's studio, and I introduced him around, and Neil looked at his stuff, and he said, "Well, I don't think, and Terry's stuff, he did a lot of work with technical pens, like rapidographs and things.
Okay.
Very detailed, very fine line, but a dead line, not like a flexible line, like a drawer, an artist's pen or brush. And,
okay.
And so I think Neil didn't think he was probably fit material for what they were doing over there. And he said, he'd be perfect for Simonson. And he knew Walt was my roommate at the time. And I said, I think he saw that I was trying to foist Terry off on him. And so he was trying to foist him back on me and Walt. And I said, yeah, but Walter inks his own stuff. He doesn't really need a background guy. I don't know that it would, work. And he kind of shrugged and I left Terry there and he hung around for a while. And I don't know if it was that day, but somebody came in and had something they were working on and they needed help because it was late. And I think they sat him down at a spare board and they said, "Ink these backgrounds, kid." And I have to ask him about that sometime and refresh my memory. But he started getting a little bit of work. And the next thing you know, Giordano was saying, this stuff is pretty good. I like the detail you added, and all this fine line stuff. So I seem to remember Dick was inking a Conan job over John Buscema, and he threw Terry a bunch of the pages to do backgrounds on. That might have been his first professional job, or just about. So I didn't exactly give him the work, but I certainly put him in the right environment to get the work. And Terry's my buddy, and inked me on a number of occasions too, and became, obviously, because of his connection with Byrne and the X-Men, became like a superstar inker, and never paid me royalties. So I'm really pissed. Anyway, pardon me?
I was going to say, do you want to leave it there? That was fantastic.
I think that's a good spot. Yeah.
All right, excellent.
All right. I guess let me just say one other thing. People have approached me and said, "Oh, we know Fanfare was just created to burn off inventory," and I said that is absolutely not the case. Now, the first issue, the lead feature was an inventory job technically, but that's not why it was created. It was created because the format was fancier and better and nicer, and it also paid the freelancers better, and it was also to take advantage of the direct market. Over the years, I did, in fact, incorporate a lot of inventory material if I thought it was good stuff or worthy. But it was not like a dumping ground for stuff that had no home.
Understood. Yeah.
I tried to be discerning, and I certainly assigned lots of new material for it, and so it was a mixture, and I thought a pretty good mixture. So we'll
go ahead.
Finish
it. I was going to say it was a showcase for these new artists, and beyond the stories themselves, there's a lot of sketch, beautiful. If they were going to be covers, but instead ended up being pinups in the book. I mean, this is
I don't think
it really was. Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, I don't think there were unused covers that became pinups. Because the format was so nice, the paper and the printing and the color was so nice, that I decided to, and it was an easy space filler to assign portfolios to different artists. I mean, I would choose artists who I thought their stuff was interesting or offbeat or just plain good, or in some cases just strange enough that they maybe weren't getting regular work, but a pinup, a bunch of pinups, a portfolio to showcase their stuff, probably I hope gave them a little more cachet in the public eye and so on, and so I did a number of those, and in fact culminating, I suppose, in that I did one issue that was literally all pinups.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was 32 different pinups by 32 different artists, and not long on story content, obviously. And of course, I also published John Byrne's all pinup issue of the Hulk, where every page was a splash page.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the editor on the Hulk, who was Denny O'Neil at the time, I think, rejected the job. I don't think John. Knowing John, I doubt he ran it by him first. I think he just probably came in with it and said, "Hey, I decided to do an all splash page issue," and Denny rejected it, and I'm sure that didn't make John happy. But I said, "John, hey, I'll publish it in Fanfare and pay an extra 50%, which since he wrote, penciled, and inked it, he got a nice little what's the word I'm looking for? Windfall. Thank you. Exactly. I was going deadfall, and I knew that wasn't it. But yeah, so windfall. Exactly. Thank you for editing
me.
My
pleasure.
And so and that was another one that I thought was interesting and worked possibly better in Fanfare than it would have in the regular monthly Hulk title too. But
totally agree,
anyway.
man. Again, it was a marquee book, and absolutely. So every story. Listen, Al, I'll let you go, but we will put a pin in it there. But when we start again, I promise I will have more fanfare questions.
Well, and I'll try to have more. Your timing is good because they are now doing a fanfare omnibus.
I'm aware of that.
And, and it's 3 separate omnibi. Is that right? About 20 issues per. And I'm doing new editorial introductions for them. And so I have just reread recently the first 40 issues of Fanfare, and they just sent me files of the last 20 issues, so I'm more or less up to date. I haven't read the last 20 yet, so I may be a little sketchy on some of those, but I'll be able to talk with at least a little bit of recollection about some of those issues. So anyway,
wonderful.
All right, we'll take this up tomorrow. All right, John. I'm just heading towards my studio to grab a chair, and we can continue.
Sounds good, man. No, get situated. All good.
Yep.
I'll ask you before we. I was going to say I'll ask you before we start. Have you seen Superman and have you seen Fantastic Four yet?
Marvel was nice enough to invite me to a screening of the FF movie on Wednesday, and I took one of my sons with me because although none of my kids care for comic books much, although my daughter did like Archie comics when she was young, which, before I was working for Archie, so I couldn't help her out then. But my boys don't care for the comics, but they like the MCU. They've seen, I guess, all of the Marvel movies. It's their thing. They go together.
Wow.
To see it. Usually in the first week it's released, and then they go out for dinner afterwards, and then they discuss whether it was a good movie or not.
What'd you think of the movie?
I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was very good. I had a couple little things that I didn't care about or care for. I like that. What's his name? Pablo Pascal. Is that his name?
Pedro Pascal. But
Pedro. That sounds vaguely like I'm a racist. Well, anyway.
Not at all.
Pedro Pascal. No, I've just got a bad memory. Let's put it that way.
It's all good, man. No. That's fair.
I know. He's a good actor. I like him. I've seen him in lots of other things. He's in everything these days.
Yes.
It seems like, including that show, The Last of Us, about the slightly different take on a zombie apocalypse.
Yep.
But I just couldn't get used to Mr. Fantastic with a mustache. I guess that's so. But I'm still not used to Nick Fury as a black guy either. I envision them as, and certainly Samuel L. Jackson is a terrific actor and a wonderful character. Always interesting and likable, and except when he's despicable, which he has been, like in Django Unchained or something. And
sure.
I can accept it. I'm not that hidebound that I have to have them just the way Lee and Kirby created them in the first place, because we're being a lot more liberal and what's the word they use? Where you've got a lot of different
diversity, like a lot of diversity.
Yeah, diversity's good. That's not what I was going for, but
okay.
That's perfectly reasonable. That's a good word for it.
Inclusive. But I hear you, man. Because as comic book fans, we have preconceived notions of how these characters look, and I felt the same way when they announced that Pedro Pascal was going to be Mr. Fantastic. Because I'm like, okay. I mean, again, great actor, and thank God, I think he did fine. I thought he was excellent in it. But no, I hear you, man. And even gender swapping the Silver Surfer as they did. And it's like, okay, I guess.
Yeah, I thought that was unnecessary again, but interesting. And it's interesting that it was Shala Bal, but she at some point in the movie she mentions Norrin Rad.
Right.
So you've seen it already, have you?
Oh yeah, I saw it Thursday. Al, it was my opinion that much like a what if comic book, that it almost played like, all right, well, this is an alternate universe anyway. So what if Shalabal was Galactus' hero?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because the whole concept of Marvel using the alternate universe premise is it just strikes me strange and wrong because, when I was a kid, Marvel, the thing that Marvel did, that was interesting is they had all their adventures were, based on Earth, and actual Earth with, with New York City and Los Angeles, and, DC had Metropolis or Gotham City or Central City or Midway, they had all fictional cities.
Right.
And also DC, of course, had the multiverse concept, where they had that great issue of the Flash, the Golden Age Flash was, we find out, in an alternate universe where they and they had so they had the multiverse, and they had the whole different set of Golden Age characters who managed somehow to cross the boundaries between the dimensions and meet and team up with and the Justice League and the Justice Society, of course, but Marvel, it was a cohesive single universe. Yeah, there was the original Human Torch, which they, Roy ultimately brought into the current mythos and turned him into the Vision. And of course, Submariner, we find out now, is immortal, and he was living, in the Bowery with a big beard. It wasn't until the Torch gave him a nice close shave with his flame that we realized that he was actually the same guy as the Golden Age Submariner and so on. So the two, and then DC had the Crisis on Infinite Earths, so all the multiverse Earths, I guess. I never read it, I'm afraid, but
no worries.
Because I wasn't, like I said, while I was working, I never had time to read any of the books from us or the competitors.
I get it, Al. Absolutely.
So they collapsed into a single universe, I guess, and now Marvel all of a sudden has got the multiverse. So they've completely switched positions and switched sides on that issue, and obviously it's made for some interesting comic books and a whole variety of other things you can play with. But in my heart of hearts, I resent the fact that Marvel is now given in, and they've become DC, and DC has become Marvel in that respect.
I hear you, man. I feel like they're beaten to death, the alternate universe thing. And I mean, we've got it in the TV shows, Loki and these things, and we had it in the Doctor Strange movie, and obviously it's coming with Doomsday and Secret War, the next two Avenger movies. And we'll see how they do with them, but it's kind of like zombies right now, Al, in a lot of horror movies, where it's like too many zombies. I feel like they've beaten the trope to death, frankly.
Well, the creative people have a tendency to follow the trends.
You got it.
And of course, Martin Goodman, who was the publisher of Marvel from the 40s up through the early through the 60s, parts of the 60s. I don't remember when he sold the company, but he was notorious for jumping on a trend, flooding the market with whatever that trend was, and then canceling all the titles once the interest dried up. It was that was sort of his business model, if you will.
Couldn't agree more, man. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that's partly what Marvel owes its revival to in the 60s, was the fact that Marvel was doing their, they were limping along doing their monster comics, which again I think were wonderful. Really, I didn't like them at the time. But I came to once I picked a bunch up and started reading them, and they were great. And but then DC was, of course, the old steady giant in the business with the Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and then they revived the Flash, the beginning of the Silver Age, they call it, And then, one after the other, they revived Green Lantern, they revived Hawkman. And these were, all characters that I had no idea had existed before my tender years at the time. And I think Goodman got wind of that and said, hey, maybe we should try these superheroes again. And that seemed to have coincided with Kirby, who was, getting very minimal work at that period. If you can imagine that. Jack Kirby couldn't get enough work. Now he is a prodigious producer. So, it's not like I couldn't get enough work. If I had maybe 2 books a month, that would be great. But, Kirby can do 3, 4, 5 books a month. And not break a sweat, and it would be like the greatest stuff you've ever seen. Yeah. So apparently, according to the things I've read that Jack said, and I don't necessarily trust his memory on some of these things, but he claims he went up to Marvel with a bunch of on the day they were closing up, because they had Stan apparently had bought way too much inventory because say what people say what they will about Stan, he was a terrific writer and scripter, and he certainly knew how to make the most of his artistic talent. But he also had a soft spot in his heart. He didn't want people to go without work or conceivably go hungry, or at least, work-wise go hungry.
Yeah.
So he would assign people who would come in and deliver a job, and he'd give them another job to do. Whether they, as you mentioned the other day, they only had 8 titles at the time. And so they had limited space to publish all these stories. So apparently, at some point, either Goodman said, how have we spent all this money? Where is all this editorial material? Where are these stories? And apparently, Stan had like a closet just chock full of, from floor to ceiling with stories that he hadn't published yet.
Yes.
So I wonder if they ever did publish all of those or not, because when they started putting the superheroes into the anthology titles, they would have the lead superhero character, and then they'd have a couple of those ubiquitous Stan and you name the artist backup stories, whether it was Don Heck or Steve Ditko or Dick Ayers, or there was a guy named was it Martin Fox? Somebody Fox. I can't remember his first name.
I don't know, but was Don Heck part of that group as well?
Yeah, Don Heck. I think Don Heck, because Don was, a very good artist. I think underappreciated by the fans, but he was a really good artist. Yeah,
agreed. First Iron Man artist.
Well, yeah, the first Iron Man. Although I still believe that Kirby did the cover for that issue first. Okay. And then the story is that he also did layouts for the entire job, to speed things along, and sure. Because Don wasn't nobody's as dynamic as Kirby, but Stan would get Jack to do layouts for people who maybe weren't the premier superhero type artists. So he did it for Don, and he did some, I think he did layouts for of all people, Alex Toth on that X-Men issue that Alex did. Yeah,
I know that he did it for Romita on early Daredevil.
Exactly. That was the next one on my list.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. You know what? From now on, I'm going to interview you.
Stop it.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm teasing.
I know you.
I know. I think he also. Well, yes. People out there accept that I have a sense of humor. And I use it way more than I probably should. But anyway.
No, this is great. Al, this has been great. Seriously. I've enjoyed our conversation very much.
That's nice of you to say. So I believe he did stuff for Werner Roth on the X-Men also. And a lot of times you'll see it, especially the splash page, I think Kirby would do maybe a little tighter. And then he'd do simpler stuff just to give the guys the storytelling. I think he did some layouts for George Tuska on Captain America, I believe. At some point. So, Stan just thought, Kirby was the best dynamic guy and a terrific storyteller and tried to use every ounce of him that he could use to get all the other artists who were, working for Marvel at the time to, to do that kind of thing. He may have even done some layouts for Dick Ayers. And all these guys I mentioned were old established pros, but they weren't necessarily big in the superhero genre. And what was I going to say there a second ago? Oh, well, no, Jack would do layouts for them, and it would make the stuff more exciting. And I also think that whole spate of new characters that they came up with back at that period, the very early 60s, I think Jack, of course, was drawing half of them, if not more. And also, but I think he did, as presentation pieces, he did he did presentation pieces which were then used as covers. So I think the Iron Man cover for that first issue was probably his presentation piece. He did the cover for the first Daredevil, which was, I believe, inked by Bill Everett, and then Everett did the interior, and that was interesting because Everett had worked for Timely and Marvel all through the 40s. And then he was doing, working on the horror comics that Stan was doing, and all through the 50s, and some really beautiful stuff. I want to say, I mean, his drawing was very, very unique and offbeat, but he did beautiful variety of textures in his ink work, and he drew really cute girls. And I can't remember, did he do one of the superhero women in the 40s, like Miss America or the Golden Girl? Was it Golden Girl?
I will look it up as we're discussing and find out. Yeah. But I agree with you, man. No, and I find those Atlas comics very interesting, and I'm really glad that they're getting the hardcover treatment recently. And I spoke to Dr. Michael Vasulo, who is kind of the historian that's behind that era. And all that, and Sid Shores. And the guy that died young, was it Joe Maneely? I forget the guy who died in the 50s. Okay.
By all reports, he was Stan's favorite artist.
Yes, that's what I heard. I know, which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, apparently the story, I'm not totally clear. He may have been drunk or drinking, but he was traveling home on the Long Island Railroad, and he stepped out between cars and fell off the train and was killed.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was not an old guy. I don't know how old he was, but he was relatively young. I'm feeling like he was probably in his 30s.
Wow.
And had been around, of course, for a while, and had worked mostly for Marvel. I know he did at least one or two jobs for DC at some point. And again, by all accounts, he was one of the fastest guys in the business. He would come in. He worked at the office because that's why he was traveling back and forth on the train.
Sure.
And he would sit down and he'd do apparently loose drawings, loose layouts or breakdowns or whatever. And then he could go directly to inks, and he did very nice textural stuff. And he could draw anything, and it was a nice style. And a lot of people have speculated, what would have happened if he hadn't died? Would he have been important to the Marvel resurgence in the superhero genre?
Yeah.
And my feeling, and it's only my opinion, is that he would not have been important to it, because as well as he drew, his stuff wasn't dynamic, and it wasn't like the big beefy characters with the incredible action and the interesting, mechanical backgrounds and special effects. There's a reason why they call it Kirby Crackle, because he created it, that kind of thing. And Maneely was terrific, but I can't see him being that great on that kind of action material. Now, Stan was terrific at using guys in every capacity he could. So, he had Kirby laying the stuff out, or drawing the stuff, or doing whatever Kirby was doing for what were at the time pretty mediocre rates. And he would get, Sal Brodsky inked some of the early FFs, I believe. And Joe Sinnott inked number 5 of the FF, which was the first Doctor Doom story. And then Dick Ayers was doing a lot of the inking on it. And then, of course, when Jack couldn't do an issue of something, Dick Ayers was often called on to do the penciling for an issue. And then Stan sort of resurrected the careers of a lot of Golden Age artists who I can only imagine were struggling to get by at the time. That's something I don't think he gets enough credit for, because it wasn't like necessarily out of the goodness of his heart. Although I did hear that he kept buying jobs when he shouldn't have, just to keep people working. But he had Dick Ayers. He would pencil stuff when needed. He would ink Kirby when needed. He would ink Ditko when needed, which was a terrible idea. He would, because he wasn't a good one. He was, Dick was a solid penciler and a solid inker, but his inks were a little on the heavy-handed side. And luckily, you can't hurt Kirby. You can make Kirby better. You can polish him up, but the storytelling and the action are going to be there, no matter no matter who inks it. And famously, his wife Roz was credited as inking some of the stuff he was doing for DC just before Marvel's revival. Wow. Apparently, he would draw he was doing Green Arrow, and he was doing what else was he doing for DC? He was he's doing Challengers of the Unknown. Challengers, he had Wally Wood, so he ultimately had Wally Wood. And Wally Wood, is one of the all-time great pencilers and inkers.
Oh my God, yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and on Kirby, he was almost like counterintuitive on his inking of Kirby. But Woody would always he'd make everybody look like Wood, and and even he couldn't totally suppress Kirby because he'd still have the action, but the polish on it and the backlighting with the on the faces and the machinery suddenly became this great, super well-defined Wally Wood machinery on top of Kirby's brilliant concepts for it, which were just like nobody else. And and George Russo, who had been a penciler and inker through the 40s and 50s, and he was, I don't know exactly when he came on staff at Marvel, but he was sort of their main cover colorist. And he was a very good colorist, and I really liked George's inks, and he was capable of some very nice penciling. He used to work with Mort Meskin back in the day. And
I love Mort Meskin's art. He's amazing.
Yeah. Well, he's another guy I think is mainly unappreciated, because in the early 40s, he was doing terrific work, spectacular work, and according to both Steve Ditko and Gil Kane, who I spoke to about this back in the day, he was one of the major influences on all the young cartoonists. He and Kirby, according to Gil, were neck and neck. They were like the two brilliant, guys in the comics field who, everybody else was imitating and emulating. And of course, Gil himself is influenced by those two, as well as Lou Fine, who was a brilliant. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought. I didn't mean to interrupt with my oh my God.
Yeah. Well, he was doing work for Quality Comics, I believe, mostly, and these beautiful, graceful, elongated figures. I suppose they owed something to Alex Raymond, but he certainly developed his own style as to the way he drew and the way he inked. And he later went on to get do newspaper strips with where by this time it was not as graceful and so on, but beautifully designed black and white work and just great use of blacks and probably, I guess, some Kniff influence, because Kniff was the guy who introduced that heavy use of blacks and like nobody's business with the chiaroscuro, if you'll allow me to use an art term. That means the contrast of dark and light.
Okay.
And he was brilliant at it. And I once asked Ditko whether he was influenced by Joe Kubert, because I thought there were periods where their inking and cross-hatching and use of blacks were very reminiscent of one another.
I see it. Yeah.
Ditko and Kubert. Yeah. I mean, you look at some of the stuff Steve was doing in the all through the 50s, and you look at the stuff Kubert was doing, and you know, Steve's stuff was a little more angular and a little stiffer, but it was extremely well designed also, as was Kubert's, and their use of blacks was very similar. And you know, Steve gave me kind of I don't know if I offended him or if he was just, you know, wondering where I got that from. And he said, no, you know, Kubert and I were really contemporaries. I mean, I know Joe sort of started at an extremely young age. I think he was drawing stuff professionally at the age of maybe 14, 15.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah,
that's what I heard. He was there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, and you know, it was crude, but you could see the talent. And then later, you know, he was doing Hawkman for DC, the 40s version of Hawkman, not the revival. And and so, you know, and Steve said, no, he said we were contemporaries, but I think we were probably both influenced by Mort Meskin. And I said,
great.
really, Mort? Yeah, I said, Mort Meskin, I never thought his stuff was that great. And he said, oh no, he was terrific. And he brought me in a bunch of clip art that he had, you know, pages clipped out of comic books of Mort Meskin's artwork. And I looked at it, and the reason I was down on Meskin, or not fond of Meskin, was I was more familiar with the stuff he did for DC in the 60s.
Okay,
and
sure.
His drawing had fallen off some. His design was still good, and his use of blacks and the composition was still good, but the drawing was not as good as it had been. And I believe that I've heard this. I don't know it for an absolute fact, but you know, people I know who knew Meskin said, oh, you know, he had a number of nervous breakdowns.
Wow.
And that had affected his drawing adversely.
Wow.
And Jack Abel once told me that he was up at DC, and Robert Kanigher, who was an excellent writer, but apparently shit.
That's what I hear too. Yeah.
He was berating Meskin's work. Meskin had delivered a job, and apparently Abel was there, and he saw this. So that, you know, he was tearing him a new one. This is terrible. I don't know why we even give you work any. You're awful. Blah blah blah. And he said Meskin. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He was just standing there, and he was literally shaking. Oh. And I think Kanigher, and you know, Kanigher as an editor also up there, was in a position of some power. And here's this poor guy who'd been a mainstay of the industry since the very early 40s, and I'm sure he was afraid he was never going to get another job.
Sure.
So yeah, so that was a horrible. You know,
story. I've seen that 1940s Mort Meskin work on things like Vigilante. And yeah, man, no, he was beautiful, and I agree with you about Lou Fine. I think Mac Rayboy gets lost in the cracks because, again, it takes people that know comic strips and Captain Marvel Jr. stuff.
Right.
Because and he does. So no, I hear you. No, honestly, Al, I love what you're talking about right now, because I think a lot of younger listeners and viewers don't know these stories and don't know about these names, and they need to find them because, you know, it really is Kubert, Kirby, a very, you know, obviously Toth and Ditko, but there's a very select few from the Golden Age that really get their due. I agree with you.
Yeah, and Meskin is one who certainly deserved it. And the other guy who doesn't seem to get as much recognition is Reed Crandall.
Agreed. Yes, Blackhawk, indeed.
He did.
Yes.
He did Blackhawk. Well, he also did Quality Comics. That line was well named. I mean, they were Quality Comics.
Yeah.
They had the artists they had working for them in the 40s were Lou Fine, Reed Crandall, doing, you know, a lot of times, I think Crandall may have started out sort of as a Lou Fine imitator, but he drew so well, you know, it was 50-50. You know, they were equally good. And of course, they had Eisner. They had. Oh, I'm having a senior moment. Well, the guy who created Plastic Man.
Oh, Jack. Now I'm having a senior moment. Jack Cole. Jack
Cole, who is brilliant and wonderful. And Jack Cole and going back to Bill Everett, those in the early 40s, those guys were like tremendously creative, and they both created a number of new characters that people have now forgotten. But the enduring ones, are Plastic Man and Submariner. But both of them created a number of other successful characters, almost on a par with Simon and Kirby. And who else was I going to say? I don't know.
While
you're
thinking, Bill Everett, I looked it up. Wasn't known for female superheroes, but he did do Namor's cousin, Namorita, or however you said her name.
Yeah, Namora, wasn't it?
Well, there maybe Namora, exactly, because I know there's a couple Namor siblings or cousins. But also, of course, there was Betty, the human love interest of Namor's from that period as well.
Something?
I don't remember her last name, but absolutely, yeah.
Was she a newspaper reporter?
Yeah, oh, that's right. She was a newspaper reporter, excuse me. Yeah, like Lois Lane, sure.
Well, Lois Lane, yeah, shtick. Well, he did draw very cute female.
Oh yeah, I've seen his 40 stuff, absolutely.
Yeah, and in the 50s too for the Atlas books. And
yes, and also I was glad that he brought him back in the 70s to do supervillain team up with Dr. Doom and Namor and everything, and that Bill was still getting jobs. And again, I think that shows the Stan's good side of trying to help a friend who was having. I know Bill had a tough personal life.
Yeah. Yes, I understand that he may have had a drinking problem also. So
what I heard. Yeah.
So I don't like to tell tales.
I was going to say Jack Cole. When you mentioned Jack Cole, he also had a lot of energy in his art in a different way than Kirby. And I think they were the two real kinetic action artists of their day.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And his stuff had more of a humorous bent.
Sure.
Which, of course, Plastic Man, and clearly Plastic Man was the, precursor to Mr. Fantastic and all the other stretchy superheroes that they had.
Absolutely. Elongated Man, absolutely.
Yeah, Elongated Man, and Jimmy Olsen was Elastic Lad or something.
Right.
So, there were a lot of these guys, getting up in the morning and stretching and, putting their arms through the windows accidentally. So
why not?
So,
I want to get it back to you, Al, because honestly, and I appreciate what you're saying, and when you said that a lot of times when Wally Wood would ink something, it looked like Wally Wood, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. So when you were an inker, because there are, even to this day, there are inkers that really do change the style of the penciler. Mike Norton, who was a contemporary artist, Sienkiewicz was inking him on Green Arrow, and the result was something that wasn't Sienkiewicz and it wasn't Mike Norton. It was very, very different. How did you approach inking? Because you obviously inked a lot of both stars and jobbers, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but names that haven't endured over the decades. But how would you approach inking?
Well, that's actually an interesting question, and I'm walking into the fridge to get not into the fridge, but into the kitchen to get a soda. So
by all means, man.
I don't go too dry. Well, I started out as I don't remember. My first job in comics was working for Murphy Anderson.
Okay.
And Murphy was an established pro. He was probably in his mid-40s at the time. He had done work for is it Fiction House that did Planet Comics, I believe? And he, so pretty early on in his life, he loved science fiction, and he was doing these science fiction one-page things about life on different planets, as envisioned through the eyes of a science fiction writer. And there was a character called, was it Space Pirate? I should remember. He was a Robin Hood type. He was some kind of a pirate, but he'd always end up in adventures where he had to rescue some girl, or some really really evil guys would steal some stuff, and he would somehow, they'd stole money that was supposed to go to an orphanage, and he would have to go after them and get the money back and all this stuff. Anyway, he'd worked in the late 40s, and some point in the 50s he was doing the Buck Rogers newspaper strip.
Okay.
And so in some ways he sort of had a parallel career to Mac Rayboy, who was doing the Flash Gordon strip. Mac Rayboy, Mac Rayboy was, again, probably a name not as well known, although he did do Captain Marvel Jr. Murphy did Buck Rogers, and then in the 50s, he did a lot of work at DC, penciling and inking stuff, for the sci-fi magazines, Mystery in Space, Strange Adventures. He did a lot of the covers. He was, they considered him a terrific cover artist. He, at some point, his career morphed, and he became more of, or maybe I should say Murphed, but he became more of a inker than penciler. This is not to say he was not still capable of penciling. He certainly was. He did, at some point he took over. Well, during the 50s, he did the Atomic Knights. I think that was in Strange Adventures.
That's correct.
Yeah, and early in the 50s, with those sci-fi titles at DC, he was doing. He might have done some Captain Comet, and they had other ongoing features in those early sci-fi books at DC, and I'm pretty sure he worked on one or more of those. But he's doing the Atomic Knights. And he was doing, at some point in the 60s, he took over the Hawkman strip from Kubert. Yep. And he did a nice long run on that. He worked on the Spectre, penciling and inking some stuff. I think he was maybe in and around issues of Neil Adams, so that's a hard act to follow, but Murphy did beautiful stuff. And he was also one of their best inkers. Both on, he would ink Mike Sikowski on some of the Justice League covers, and he would ink Carmine on some of the Flash stuff, and he'd ink Gil Kane on the Atom and on Green Lantern occasionally. And it's sort of, he and Joe Giella were sort of the two mainstay inkers of the DC house style.
You didn't mention Kurt Swan, his wonderful collaboration with Kurt Swan.
Well, that's where I came in. He was doing Superman. No, that's okay. I'll go off on a tangent.
I love the tangent.
Yeah,
you did great, Al. Seriously, this is
I should have majored in geometry with all these tangents. But anyway, when I started for Murphy, this was in the summer of '72. Starlin and I had both moved out to New York. I mentioned Jim and I went to junior high school together.
No, you didn't, but I love this. This is good background for our panel that we're going to do at Terrificon, but keep going. Well, Jim and I met in junior high school, we called it then. And, somebody I knew said, you like to draw that comic book stuff. There's another guy who draws also. And I said, yeah, let me see, And then, of course, he drew way better than I did. So I went, oh, no, I was feeling cocky until I saw his work. And Jim was, a bit of a phenom. He was really extremely talented from early on. And whereas I would do maybe a page, or I do a lot of figure sketches, or I do maybe a page and a half and I'd run out of steam, Jim would literally draw 20-page stories of he had a bunch of characters that he had created, and he would do complete stories, very nice, beautiful, tight pencils, Kirby influence, Gene Colan influence, Kubert influence, Ditko influence. All amalgamated into his own style.
but I'd forgotten how much he took from Colan on some of that earlier stuff. I was looking at some of it. Yeah, I was looking at some of it recently, and I said, "Whoa, I can see, the looseness of the figures and the beautiful use of blacks." He was great. And then we also, of course, went to high school together because we lived in neighboring towns. So I've known him since, 63 or 64, maybe.
Wow.
So we go back a long way. We go back a long distance, as they say. And of course, once I realized how good he was, I said, you know what? I'll just ink his stuff. I may as well give it up, and I'll do his stuff. And by and large, I did. And he, I still have a stack of pages in my basement that he drew back in that period before we ever got into the industry, including he had created. He was doing samples for. I remember he did some Lois Lane samples, and you might say why. Well, Kirby was at DC at this point,
okay,
and he had done the revamp of Jimmy Olsen, and so Jim thought, hey, maybe I can do the revamp of Lois Lane, and I think I remember, Lois Lane and Superman, and he drew Darkseid in the sequence and stuff. It was very impressive, and then at some point he did some Marvel samples, and he had Iron Man and Tony Stark, and of course, and he, all of a sudden there's an explosion in Tony's living room. And by the way, his living room, he was for some reason he was living in like a very middle class suburban neighborhood. So it's a very modest house for a multi-millionaire. And all of a sudden there's an explosion, and he's blown out of his armchair, and his shirt is torn away, revealing his Iron Man armor beneath.
Right.
And this figure appears in the midst of some Kirby crackle, and it's Thanos.
Right.
So he created Thanos, and also there's another character out on the street searching for Thanos, who is Eros, Thanos' brother from Titan. So I mean, he had created these characters. He also had created Drax the Destroyer, that character, and he created all of them before he ever got into the business or moved to New York.
Wow.
Yeah, and
I've seen that Thanos bust of sandstone that Jim made, or whatever, and he brought it to Terrificon a couple of years ago, and I remember seeing that. And but keep going. No, please.
Yeah, he gave me one of those, so I have that. And Walter Simonson gave me a nice full color little statue of Manhunter, which is I'm looking at it right now. It's across the room. Wow. Really nice, well executed thing. Yeah. So yeah.
Very, very cool. But yeah, so you're ranking. Cool. You're ranking.
So yeah, so Murphy, at the time, getting back to where I came in on this, Starlin was getting work on his own already, and I was not. I had a short stint working for Rich Buckler, who I knew, another guy from the Detroit area. We got along well. Later, we did not. But he wanted me to work for him. He was doing like breakdowns, and he wanted me to tighten them up and make them into full pencils. And I really was not capable of doing professional quality work yet. This is, we're talking, this is mid 72. Wow. And I had already been up to DC and Marvel and been rejected. And Warren rejected me also.
Wow.
And Starlin. We came out together at one time earlier before this period and got rejected by everybody. We almost sold the job to Skywald, which was a company run by Sal Brodsky. That's the Sky in Skywald, and a publisher named Israel Waldman, who was he had a small publishing empire. And he would do all kinds of magazines, and including, he was the guy, I believe, behind, there was a line of like reprint Golden Age comic books. And it came under at least two different indicias. One was Super Comics. It had like a little, like sort of a medallion or a blue ribbon or something, Super Comics. And then later it was called IW Comics. And I think the IW were maybe in a sort of a pyramid shape. And IW stood for Israel Waldman, which was the name of the guy, the publisher. Sure. And apparently he had found a house, full of old printing plates from various comic publishers.
Wow.
And he said, hey, and it was probably, I assume it was all in public domain by then, because it was all stuff by, defunct publishers and outmoded stuff. But some of it was, some of it was Plastic Man, and some of it was, I believe, the Spirit, Eisner's Spirit. And, and he would he would commission a new cover by some, he had Andrew and Esposito did covers for him. Russ Heath did covers for him. Jack Abel did covers for him. He got contemporary guys to do brand new covers, and he would, sell them for whatever the going cover price was at the time. But the genius of him was, he didn't have to pay for any of the editorial material because it was stuff he found, and also he would sell advertising space. Because throughout the history of comics, there were a lot of every issue would be devoted to ads, maybe a third. So he would get advertising money. I don't know who was distributing the stuff, but he got a distributor because he was a good solid professional publisher, and he mostly just did sort of knockoffs of what more popular publishers were doing. And so he had a whole line. He had a whole line of comic books, all different genres: war comics, Western comics, romance comics, etc., and superheroes, some superhero stuff. So and whenever I found these, usually they'd be at a used bookstore or a mom and pop store, where they weren't getting major newsstand distribution. But apparently he made a nice living. So
1958 to 1964 for IW Comics, and like you said, a lot of publishers like Avon and Fawcett and Fox Syndicate and Quality and Nador and Standard. So interesting.
Yeah.
No,
well, now,
that's crazy.
Do me a favor, look up Super Comics.
Sure.
Is that the other one I said? I think it was Super Comics.
Yeah, you mentioned Super Comics too. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm pretty sure that was the imprint.
We'll find out in a second.
So while you're doing that, I'll mention that. So I went to work, briefly for Buckler. He was a very talented guy. I'll say that. I came to really, really hate him. I don't know if I'll go into that story right now, but I went to work for him, and over the course of a month, I think we did maybe a dozen pages, and he was paying me $5 a page to finish his breakdowns. So, I did 12 pages over the course of 2 months. So what's 5 times 12? That's 70?
5 times 12 is...
60. Excuse me.
60, yeah, 60. Yeah.
So I had met, I'd gone up to DC at this point, and they liked my samples, and they liked my samples over Starlin, and they said, hey, how about we get the two of you up here, working together, you're a good team. And I said, well, he's already getting work up at Marvel, and Carmine, who was looking at my portfolio, said, they're just going to ruin him. And and I thought that's a funny attitude, considering you just wanted me to get him to come over and work with me here, but clearly there was a lot of professional jealousy going on there. And
sure.
but they called Murphy into the office, and he looked at my stuff, and he said, oh yeah, Alan, you've definitely got some good stuff going on here. I said, oh, thanks. And he offered me a job doing inking backgrounds for him.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but Buckler, who had been a friend in Detroit, said, "Look, come on out to my house. I'll lay stuff out. You'll tighten it up. You can live with me temporarily." I actually had an apartment with Starlin on Staten Island at the time, and a couple other guys. But clearly, Rich was not going to produce enough work to support himself and me. And so Starlin and I bailed him out of a deadline situation at Marvel during the same period, where his phone had been disconnected for non-payment, and he was living out in somewhere on Long Island, and Starlin and I were up at Marvel, and I always say Gemini, and that's where I get that little Gemini that I used to sign our covers with. Because people say, "Hey, what are you up to, Al?" I said, "Well, Jim and I are doing Captain Marvel. Jim and I are doing Warlock. Gemini." So I just said, "Oh, Gemini, we're like the twins. He's the one with hair." So, I went, so we went up to Marvel, and Roy Thomas and somebody else, might have been Marie, came out and accosted us. "Hey, Milgrom, Starlin." Yeah. He probably got top billing. "Starlin, Milgrom, your friend Buckler owes us a job, and it's due in first thing next week." This was like late in the week, the previous week, and if he doesn't get it in, he's fired. And I said, "Hey, am I my brother's keeper?"
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, so we were all from the Detroit area, yes, but we weren't. we weren't associated with Buckler per se. They didn't know I was helping him on. It was Kazar was the strip that he was doing. He was doing two strips for Marvel, Kazar and Man Thing, and apparently he had hired me to do the tighten up breakdowns on Kazar. And meanwhile, he had also hired Bill Dubay, who was the editor at Warren Publications, Creepy, Eerie, Vampirella, and Bill was a talented writer and a decent artist, very distinctive style, and he was tightening up Rich's stuff on the Man Thing, and Roy said, "Hey, listen, tell Buckler, I don't know who he's using to ghost Man Thing for him, but we hired him. He's a hot new talent, and we want his work. We don't want some other guy's work under his name, and because we're trying to compete with the Swamp Thing over at DC, and that's drawn by Bernie Wrightson. So another hot young talent, perhaps the hottest young talent." And Buckler was good. He wasn't Bernie Wrightson good, but he certainly was talented. Rich, he was always looking to cut corners. He was always looking for an angle. He was perfectly capable of drawing this stuff, and he was fast. But he fell into the habit of like swiping everything. Like when he did the FF for a while, it was just panel after panel, endless Kirby swipes. And, listen, nothing wrong with a Jack Kirby panel in the Fantastic Four, but, he had already done that. You didn't really need, somebody doing a literal ripoff of Kirby stuff. And that's what Buckler did. And then, at DC, he would steal, Neil Adams stuff. And, to his credit, he was capable of mimicking either of those guys to a great degree. But again, he had a good style of his own, which for some reason he chose to, ignore. And he had,
he did a commission for me of Deathlock, and it's one of my first pieces, and I adore it. But now that you say all this, I kind of see a little Murphy Anderson in the way he drew Deathlock's features.
It may be. I mean, actually, I was going to say Deathlock was probably an instance where he used much more of his natural style, on that character. And he had an interesting storytelling approach where he would do like multiple panels across a page, and it was like almost like a stop motion thing where you'd see Deathlock would he'd dodge a bullet and he'd hit the ground and he'd roll and he'd come up firing, and maybe 5 or 6 panels even across the width of a page. And he was a very good storyteller. If only had just, relied on his own talents.
done the work himself, yeah.
Yeah, and not use like all these swipes. And he had assistants, and he'd say, go find a Kirby swipe for this panel, and go find a Kirby, and they'd go out and find the reference material, and then he would, they'd paste it down and he'd trace it off often. And again, he could have just freehanded it, but I'm not sure in the long run he saved himself any time whatsoever, as if he just sat down and drawn the stuff. But some guys, they feel the need, and there are certainly, look, we all have swiped. All the guys in the business have swiped somebody at one time or another. Not everybody makes a career out of it. Some do. Rich was sort of, half made a career out of it. We were talking about Wally Wood and Reed Crandall earlier, and Woody was famous for his shortcuts. I mean, he had a famous quote. I hope I don't get it wrong, but he said, "Never draw what you can copy. Never copy anything you can trace, and never trace anything you can cut out and paste down." and he was certainly capable of drawing anything, and brilliantly, and his inking was even, maybe even a step above his penciling ability, but both great. But he would do that. And Larry Hama, a lot of guys worked for him over the years. Larry Hama, Ralph Reese, Howard Chaykin, Jack Abel, Alan Kupperberg. A lot of guys were his assistants. And he was doing strips for the Army newspaper, I believe. And, Cannon was one of them. It was about
I've read those. They're amazing. And the Western one he did, too. They're great.
Shattuck, was it?
Shattuck, yeah. I was gonna guess Shattuck. Yes, absolutely.
Well, you would have been right, but I beat you to the punch. And then of course the wonderfully named Sally Forth.
Yes.
With this super cute, hot, buxom girl who managed to get her her clothes torn off every single episode.
Cannon had a lot of semi-naked women in it as well.
That was Woody's favorite thing to draw, and his stock and trade.
God bless him.
And exactly. And of course, he famously co-created the Thunder Agents because he saw that superheroes were getting hot again, and Marvel was having success. And but the thing about Woody is, and I never realized this until very recently, a friend of mine who's fanatical about tracing down swipes, tracking down swipes. Tracing would be more appropriate, but tracking down swipes, showed me some stuff that Wood had done, which was absolutely, irrefutably, him swiping Reed Crandall. And Crandall had been in the business longer. He was started out in about the early 40s, I believe, and Woody came in the very late 40s. So there's panel after panel where Wood just swiped Crandall and re-inked it, and it looked great. And they had similar qualities in that, Woody's action wasn't great the way Kirby's was, but everything with him, it almost looked like a photo frozen in midair, in mid action. And he did the figure look great, and the shadow on the ground was great, but they looked like they were just, a still photo of somebody doing something, in mid action as opposed to, the action following through, like a guy getting punched or something. So, and Reed Crandall was a brilliant draftsman, and he was much the same way. He had that kind of a stop motion look to his stuff that I'm sure was very heavily, a big heavy influence on Wood's stuff. And in fact, Woody hired him to draw some of the Thunder Agent stuff. I have a page somewhere of Thunderbolt. Is that the main guy? Dynamo.
Yeah, sure.
And it's penciled by Crandall and inked by Wood.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's just stunning. Twice up, of course, and it's just great. So anyway.
I adore Wood stuff. But like I said, Canon, I just am blown away by.
Yeah. Well,
I love those Tower Thunder Agent comics as well.
They were great. They weren't. If they could have tweaked the writing a little bit, I think they would have had a good chance at success. And they had Wood inking, half a dozen other pencilers, so the whole book often looked very much like Wood was almost the sole artist. But they had, they had Mike Zukowski penciling some stuff. They had John Giunta, who was an old time guy. He was actually Frazetta's mentor in the 40s, and
wow.
And he was solid, Giunta. And they had, I think Dick Ayers did some. Gil Kane did some stuff for him. They had various people inking him, and Woody couldn't ink at all. So some of the stuff was a little less impressive because he was not inking it. I think they had a Gil. I remember Gil Kane was doing the mentor character, and it was inked by Esposito, and that wasn't the most.
Let me ask you something. Was when Giffen and Wally Wood were doing JSA in All-Star Comics, so was Giffen the inker and Woody was the penciler?
No. Giffen was the penciler. Woody was the inker.
That's what I thought. Okay, because when you said that he wasn't a good inker, I'm like, I just remember those great All-Star comics, especially when they brought back the Golden Age Superman, and it would look like Joe Shuster Superman. And it was so great to see that.
Facially, it looked like that. Yeah. Who?
Oh my God.
When I said who wasn't a good inker.
Oh, I thought you said Woody wasn't a good inker.
No. He was
misunderstood.
Yeah, you must have. He was a spectacular inker. But he was not above. He was not above swiping. And I just chastised Buckler for swiping, but Woody swiped like nobody's business. And Larry Hama, who we know is a brilliant writer and a very good artist, also. And a terrific storyteller in his drawing.
Agreed.
He put together this famous or infamous list. He put together a page of 22 panels that always work.
Yes.
And he put together it's all Wally Wood stuff, and it shows it's a close up, two headshots, a head facing a head, a silhouette, or a figure framed in a window frame, or a vignette panel where there's no panel border, but it's a figure like a bit of a 3/4 down shot of the figure just standing there. Often with Woody, they'd be casting a shadow, but no border around it. To show depth, there'd be somebody in the foreground, with blacks being shadows across them, and then in the middle ground, there'd be somebody coming out of a door, and they'd be sort of almost a white figure framed in the black doorway, and then there'd be a third level in the farther distance, and you look at them. Oh, another one is like hand pointing in from off panel. So you'd have a big hand in the foreground pointing to whatever the subject was, a figure, an object, whatever. And there are 22 of them, 22 panels that always work. And by God, they did always work. They were terrific, little shortcuts to storytelling that 100%. if you ever got stuck, you go to that sheet and you take one.
Absolutely.
I'll do this one. That'll work.
No, thank God for social media, because I've seen those things on Twitter and Facebook a million times in the last 20 years. No question.
I know. I had a photocopy of it somewhere around many years ago. Now it's sunk into the morass that is my house. But so getting
stuff like that.
Getting back to the subject, I went to work for Murphy.
Okay.
Starlin and I went out to Buckler's place. We came in, we spent the weekend to get this Man-Thing job done, and Starlin was drawing pages, and Buckler was laying out pages that I was tightening up, and I don't remember how many I actually worked on, but as we were leaving, Rich came to the door. He says, well, gosh, you guys really saved my ass. and what can I do to repay you? How can I return the favor? And Starlin said, hey, sometime when I'm behind the eighth ball on a deadline, you can help me out. And Rich said, oh, okay. So, Jim didn't even charge him for the work he did. And I said, yeah, he just did it as a favor. And I said, well, listen, Rich, I'll just pay me my $5 a page. That was our working arrangement. And, I don't remember how many it was. He, whatever I had done on the Khazar, he still hadn't paid me for yet. So I said, just add that to my total. And it came to, like I think I said, a total of 12 pages between that and the Khazar. So he owed me $60.
Yeah.
And I said, listen, Rich, Murphy Anderson offered me a job to work as his background guy, and I'm going to take it. And he looked at me like aghast. And he said, well, why? Why would you do that? And I said, well, look, I've been working for you for 2 months now. We've only done 12 pages together. I haven't gotten paid for any of them yet. Oh, well, I got a voucher. I said, yeah, okay. And I said, so, Jim did you a favor. You and I have a working agreement. So just, you'll just pay me, but I'm going to go to work for Murphy. And he said he had the gall to say to me, well, but I can teach you a lot more than Murphy Anderson. And, Rich had been in the business for all of 6 months now. And here's Murphy Anderson, a very solid, well-established pro. And I kind of looked at him like, are you mental? But what I said was, well, maybe you could, but I know with him I'll be getting steady work. Yeah. And so I think he was probably upset at the notion of of having to do the work himself. And I did. I went to there was a Suling Con in the city, and must have been, I guess, in July of '72. And after the holiday weekend, I went over to DC, and I'm sure I must have called first, and I said, hey, look, I think I'm going to take you up on your offer, Murphy, and come work for you. He says, great. So I just come in on the next working day, and I went into DC. I was living on Staten Island at the time with Starlin and Steve Skates, the writer, and Bill Dubay, the guy who was Buckler's other assistant at the time, but he was the editor at Warren Publications. Mm-hmm. And I was replacing Mike Friedrich, who had just gotten a toehold in the industry and hated New York. He was from California, and he wanted to go back out west. And he said, well, I'm established now. I'm just going to go, back home and work through the mails. And so it was a 4-bedroom arrangement. Some guy had built 4 bedrooms over his garage on Staten Island. So I replaced Friedrich in that cadre, and I reported for work at D.C., and I sat down next to Murphy. I brought some, my art supplies with me, and he opened up his attaché case and pulled out a bunch of Kurt Swan Superman pages and handed a bunch of them over to me and said, okay, get to work. And I went, hamana. And he said, before you start, Alan, I just want to tell you the 2 rules of inking. I said, okay, good. I need some instruction. He says, number 1, we're paid to ink, not think. And number 2, when in doubt, black it out. And I said, wait a minute, let me write these down. I didn't, but so I thought that was funny, because of course, well, first of all, there was never a more thoughtful inker than Murphy. He overthought, if anything, everything on the page, and he did this beautiful, meticulous rendering, which somehow managed to make everybody look good. It was, he was his own version of Wally Wood. We mentioned the various people that he was known for inking at that period. Gil and Carmine and Mike Sikowski, and he was doing inking some Irv Novick on Batman at the time also. Okay. And everything when he got done with it, it looked great. and it had it looked more dimensional because his approach to rendering, he would go around the form. It was, very beautiful, as opposed to, I think, Joe Giella, who rendered sort of with the form instead of around the form. I thought that Joe was a terrific inker, but his stuff I thought tended to look a little flatter than Murphy's did. But he was certainly, and he was very much in the DC house style was Giella, and Murphy too, to a certain extent. They had those two guys. They had Bernie Sachs. They had Frank Giacoia, who he and Giella often did a lot of work together because Frank always needed like a crutch. He needed somebody to kind of lean on to get any work done. Later he worked a lot with Esposito, and they had the Barry brothers at one time or another, Seymour and Dan Barry, who had, by then I think they both graduated to syndicated strips. One was doing, I think Dan was doing Flash Gordon, and Cy was doing The Phantom. So two of the very biggest action syndicated strips, and they did those for many, many years, and so on.
Okay.
And Murphy was a great and patient teacher, and among other things, he and I shared a love of puns. So, Murphy would say, he'd come in, I'd come in, he'd say, "Hey, Alan, Tarzan, he went to the bad place. He died and he went to the bad place." And so they gave, his punishment was, Tarzan, you now have to paint stripes on all the wildlife that has the natural camouflage on the zebras and on the tigers. And he says, "So Alan, the moral of the story is now Tarzan stripes forever." A play on Stars and Stripes Forever, the military. So,
yeah.
And I just would, and I'd go, "Oh, Murphy," and then I'd try to come up with one to match him or top him. So we had a good time. And as a result, now you're speaking to the former Editorial. And when I go to shows these days, I had T-shirts made up where it reads Convention Al. And I'm also very whimsical and sometimes comical. And when I look at a portfolio for a kid, I'm sometimes very critical. So
fantastic, man. That's hilarious.
Yeah. My name lends itself to a wide assortment of horrifying puns.
These Golden Noise stories were great, but I wanted to ask you about Jim Shooter as a writer, because you worked on Korvac, and did you edit Jim as well before he became, or even while he was editor in chief? Were you his editor at times? I
don't recall ever being his editor. No, he was, of course, he was the writer and I suppose de facto editor on the second Secret Wars series that I penciled.
Right, that's right too. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and he was not the editor of record, but I believe, for all intents and purposes, he was, the be all and end all on that thing.
Sure.
He might deny that, because he believed in the whole approach of having an editorial staff and having an objective editor, overseeing everybody's work, which I think is perfectly reasonable. But nobody wanted to mess with him. So he did that. I don't remember being his editor. You can prove me wrong. I won't say I wasn't, but I don't
Okay.
I don't have any recollection of it. And
working with him as a writer and everything, and in art capacity. Then
first of all, I thought he was a very good writer, a very capable writer. And the proof of the pudding, he started as a professional comic book writer at the age of 13 or 14. He sent stories ideas into Mort Weisinger at DC Comics.
Sure.
And Weisinger, who I don't know and never met, but thought he had some really good ideas. And Jim, at the time, I think he said that, Marvel was doing much more interesting comic books, but he liked the DC stuff because that,
right.
He'd grown up on it,
yeah.
excuse me. And he would send in scripts and he would thumbnail the whole story. He would do drawings to show, how he was envisioning the storytelling going. And,
sure.
It's astonishing, that anybody can get a job writing comic books as a professional, but somebody at that age, it's really, he was really something of a phenom. And, and I learned actually not too long ago before he passed, that he also, had won some sort of art contest or art competition, in I don't remember what grade it would have been, but, either middle school or high school, he won some competition, which would have entitled him to go to some art school there, I guess, with a scholarship, but he turned it down, because his family was, not well off. And, some of the writing he was doing for DC was really going to help pay for the family's, expenses, the house, the food, a car, whatever it was. He was
everyday life. Yeah. He was one of the providers. Yeah.
He was, he may have been the main provider, I believe. So anyway, so he had to turn down, I would have been interesting if he'd taken up the art scholarship and gone to school for drawing or painting or whatever.
Had you seen any of his art?
I have seen only stuff that he did when he was at Marvel. Because occasionally he thought, I got to show everybody, what I'm talking about. Because he had a lot of fairly strict rules about comic book storytelling, some of which I think were valid and some of which I think were less valid. And we butted heads on them a number of times. The thing I will say about Jim is I found him easy to get along with and easy to reason with. I would go in there if I thought he was wrong about something. I'd go in and discuss it. I never went in and said, listen, you giant bonehead, you don't know what you're talking about. But I would say, listen, Jim, I think that, this approach that you're taking, it could be done, it could be done this way or this way. And he said, no, I'm not saying there's only one way to do something, but it has to fulfill these requirements, but I'm not, so he said the right thing often, but, in his heart of hearts, I don't think he believed that. I believe he thought his way was the absolutely right way and maybe the only way. So, he would had rules about writing, about penciling, about inking, probably about lettering and coloring too. And you could discuss it with him and you could disagree with him and he might be reasonable in the way he discussed it with you. But then at the end of the day, he would snap back into his original position. And outside of an entertaining little debate for a while, you might not have made a lot of progress with him.
I'm with you. Yeah.
And
that's so funny. Yeah.
I'll give you but again, it may be because I had been an editor at DC for the year first before he hired me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think I and Larry Hama, who had also been an editor up at DC at that same period, and Wheezy, who was an editor by this time at Warren Publications.
Oh yeah.
He hired the three of us, and we all had editorial experience. And I think he treated us more as equals than the guys who he hired, who came in for under him for the first time, like Grunwald and Salicrup and who else was up there? I can't keep track. Anyway,
I hear you, man. No.
Craig was Craig Anderson? Was he at DC or Marvel with me? I think he was.
I couldn't say. No, I was thinking of a Spider-Man editor, and I can't think of his name right now.
There was.
And Salicrup, obviously, is one of those guys.
Yeah, well, Roger Stern, was he on staff for a while as an editor?
I'm not sure.
I don't remember. I feel like he might have been.
But
anyway. But so I think that gave me more cachet with Jim than some of the guys he hired and he came up
groomed. Yeah. And I mean groomed in a positive way, not the way unfortunately the word groomed has changed. But trained as the young people he trained as editors. Yeah, the young people he trained as editors.
Yeah, so I think he felt like they should, having been completely instructed and raised by him, should have done it. They should have known what he wanted. And I said, look, Jim, they're not. And I think he thought, and if it didn't come out the way he thought it should, I think he felt like they were purposely ignoring him or defying him.
Sure.
And I said, no, Jim. Words are not a perfect vehicle. You want them to be able to read your mind and execute exactly the way you would. Everybody up here is trying to do what you want them to do, but there's a certain disconnect between what you say and how we interpret it. And he says, no, that can't be right. I said, well, I think it is, and we'd have the discussion and, I would get nowhere, but at least I had my say. I'll give you an example. Okay. I'll give you an example of Jim not at his best. And he was probably at his best early on when he was getting all the books back on schedule, which was a, Herculean task. And we can talk about that later if you want. But one time we're all sitting in some editor's office up at Marvel, and I don't know whether I was still on staff or not. I probably still was. Or why would I be sitting around there schmoozing in the middle of the day? So instead of home freelancing. So there were several of us, and he comes into he looms into the doorway, and I say looms because he was a huge man. He was 6'7", and a very intimidating physical presence. And he leans, and he's holding a comic book in his hand, and he's gesturing to it, and he looks at the editor and he says, "Hey, so and so," and I don't honestly remember which editor it was, so I'm not trying to save anybody's feelings here. I just don't remember. Okay. And he said, "If you don't know what's wrong with this comic, then we've got a problem." And everybody's sort of jaws just dropped. Sure. And he like a will-o'-the-wisp, he was gone. And and the editor, like, all the blood drained out of his face because his boss just came in and made this outrageous statement. And I said, I think I hung around. We chatted a little bit more. I said, "Don't worry, he'll get over it." And I went down to Jim's office and I said, "Jim, have you got a minute?" He says, "Yeah, sure, Al. What's up?" I said, "Listen, I just want to explain something to you." I said, "First of all, you are a big guy. You're aware of this, He says, "Yeah." He says, I said, "When you come into somebody's office and we're all sitting and you're standing there, all 6'7" of you, and you're clearly not happy," I said, it's a chilling tone that you're setting right there. I said, and when you point at a comic and you say, "If you don't see what's wrong with this, we've got a problem." So there's two options there. Neither one is good for the editor. Either you know what's wrong with it, but you let it get printed anyway, which that means you're just defying you. He's defying you. Or you don't know what's wrong with it, in which case, why did he hire you? If you're such an idiot, you can't follow his edicts.
Right.
I said, it's like, did you stop beating your wife yet? If you answer yes, it means you used to beat her. If you answer no, you're still beating her. It's a no-win question and answer. So
absolutely.
I said, try to be a little more diplomatic. And I said, and don't do it in front of 4 other guys. Have the guy come down to your office. I've seen you do it. Discuss it rationally. Say, "Look, sure. I'm not happy with this issue, and here's why." And give the guy a chance to understand what you're looking for, why it's wrong, and and I'm sure he'll be happy to try and correct it in future issues. This one's published. It's too late. There's nothing you can do about it. Yeah. And he said, he said, Al, you've got a good point. I shouldn't have phrased it that way. And I said, I said, yeah, listen, just everybody's on your side here. Just just try to couch it in more gentle phrasing, that kind of thing. And
sure.
he said, yeah, good point. Thanks, Al. I'm not sure it made a difference. I'm not sure it changed him one iota, but he accepted it in good graces, and he took it as a sincere, point of view. Hey,
certainly.
you can do the job. You don't have to bully everybody. You can just, hey guys, we're all on the same team here. So anyway, so that was one of my shooter stories. I have others. At one point I was on staff, and I was still doing an inordinate amount of freelance while I was an editor. So there I am at the office, 40 hours a week, give or take, and evenings, weekends, and holidays, I'm still freelancing my brains out. And one of the things I did as an editor was I started doing a lot of the covers for the titles I was editing. I was a cover artist for Marvel, and I had been briefly a cover artist over at DC, and then DC hired me as an editor for almost exactly 1 year prior to the DC implosion, where they booted me right back out the door, along with Larry Hama and 40% of their entire staff. So now Jim hired me and Larry to come work as editors at Marvel, and I was still freelancing my brains out. And one of the things I did was a lot of covers for my own books. And one day, Hama came up to me in my office. He was right next door. He said, Al, you shouldn't be doing covers for your own books. And I said, why do you say that, Larry? He says, well, it's a conflict of interest. And I said, well, He says, yeah, because you got nobody, supervising you. You're doing the covers, you're accepting the covers, nobody has any say over it. And I said, well, yeah, but I think I do pretty good covers. He goes, yeah, you do pretty good covers, but you should really have a supervisor or something. And I thought about it, and I said, well, I don't necessarily agree, but I'm going to go take it up with Shooter. So I went down to his office, and I said, Jim, I was just talking to Larry Hama, and he said I shouldn't do covers for my own books. And he said, why wouldn't you? And I said, well, that was sort of my position. But Larry said he thought it was sort of a conflict of interest, and nobody was supervising me. So I thought I'd, being an honest, straightforward kind of guy, I thought I'd mention it to you and see what you thought. He goes, well, he has a point. He says, I think you've been doing terrific covers for us. And, and I want you to continue because we think it's a selling point, but good. I'll tell you what, from now on, before you do a cover, bring the cover sketch down to me, and I will act as, your de facto editor, and I'll approve it or reject it as I see fit. And okay. I said, okay, great. And I thought that was a perfectly reasonable solution. Yeah. And then I could go back and tell Larry in your face, and and I did. And I said, okay, Larry, now Shooter's going to supervise my covers. He said, okay, good. So he didn't really care one way or the other, Larry. I think he was just stirring the pot. And but then from then on, I would go down and I'd show Jim my cover sketches. And often I was doing a lot of work. And even in those days of my youth when I had a lot of energy, I couldn't keep up with all of it. And so sometimes I would do my cover sketch on the actual cover stock rather than, Marvel had like smaller sheets of paper with the border and the cover layout on it, and there'd be a place where the UPC box would go and sure. And so on and so forth. Maybe they also had the little, like a blank corner box in the upper left-hand corner with that Marvel Comics group across the top. So they had these little, bond paper layouts available, and I would do my cover sketches on those. Okay. And then I'd either, depending on my mood, I'd either eyeball them or I had an opaque projector. Brand name was Artograph, and okay. and I could just trace them off onto the board. But I always felt like I lost something in the process when I was light boxing something or using the opaque projector.
Yeah.
And so if you could trace it off line for line, and somehow it would lose a little of the spontaneity or something. I don't know. So I started doing my cover sketches on the boards, and to different degrees of how tight. Maybe it was just a layout where you could see where the figures were going to go. Sometimes it would be tighter than that. I tend to do gesture drawings, and so sometimes I'll do a more complete figure and background and stuff like that.
Okay.
And I take, and so they would pay us $50 for a cover sketch. So if I did it on the actual board, I could save myself a step and still pay myself the extra $50. I never pointed that out to Jim, and I would take him down to Shooter, and I'd say, Jim, here's the layout for the Hulk cover. Here's a layout for the Defenders cover, and they look great, Al. Go ahead. I don't think he ever questioned or rejected a single one of those that I did for him. And so in that respect, I found him extremely easy to work with because, he was approving everything I did, which is the way I like it. Yeah. That's something John Byrne and I have in common. We want everybody to say, great, keep it up, and then leave me alone. So we would do that. Yeah. And,
that's great.
Yeah. So I like that. And of course, the reason I ended up drawing Secret Wars 2, God knows, Zek was a hard act to follow.
Yeah, Zek, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful work. And he did the first series, obviously. Well, they decided it was a big hit. They decided to do another one. And Sal Buscema did the first issue. And I can't remember if he did full pencils or just breakdowns. And for those who don't know, full pencils are nice, tight pencils. You could, if you ink them just exactly as they were, you'd have a nice, professional comic book. Breakdowns are basically the coloring book version of full pencils. Everything would be outlined, but there wouldn't necessarily be any rendering, like no feathering with the brush, no cross-hatching, and not necessarily any spotting of black areas.
Gotcha.
You could put, the shortcut in comics is if you put an X in the middle of an area, then that area should be blacked in. And all the inkers know that is the shorthand for, black.
The language.
In. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I will say this, Sal did a perfectly fine job. It was a really nice Sal Buscema job, but Jim somehow found fault with it, and I think he wanted some changes, and I think Sal said, I'm too old to be, having to redraw stuff, or words to that effect. I ought to ask him sometime, but while I still can, and but it was a perfectly fine job, and honestly, better than what I ended up doing. I am not as good an artist as Sal Buscema, and I never will be. But Jim was not pleased with the job, and he wasn't, I think, pleased with Sal's response when he wanted changes or corrections, if you will. And I remember this because we were at the Marvel Christmas party, which was at the Players Club, which is a club for actors, actually, in Greenwich. Not Greenwich Village. Wait a minute. It's a park off of 3rd and Park Avenue. What the hell's the name of that? Gramercy Park. Yes.
Okay.
It's got this nice little 1-block square park where only people from the neighborhood, they have to pay a fee and they can get a key to get into it's locked, this park. And you can't go on the grass in this park. It's they got a low fence that you're supposed to keep off it. So it's not a park in any reasonable sense of the word, but the rich people who live around there like having it, and and it's fairly exclusive, and so on. You don't. It's not a good place to take little kids to play because they can only play on the concrete areas where you'll fall and skin your knees. So anyway, it's right off of Gramercy Park, the Players Club, and it faces it. And there's, it's for actors. I guess the idea was it was for actors who were traveling, in from out of town, and that gave them a place to stay if they needed one, if they were doing a short stint, or if they were on Broadway, blah, blah, blah. And it's a charming old brownstone, and it's full of portraits of famous actors, and some of the portraits are by James Montgomery Flagg.
Yes, great artist, amazing artist, yes.
Yeah, terrific old-time illustrator, did the portrait of Uncle Sam, Once You, among others. And who was the other guy? I think he had one there. And who else? Oh, he used to, Everett Raymond Kinstler.
Oh, sure, great pulp artist, absolutely. I know this guy from the Shadow Scrapbook. Yeah.
He also did comic book work. He drew a lot of stories and covers and inside title pages for Avon Comics and others, and beautiful stuff, beautiful fine line, rendering with good use of blacks. I mean, could you tell from that he was going to go on to become the preeminent portrait artist in the country? Maybe.
He did Gerald Ford's official portrait for the White House.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes. You know why I know that? Because the Shadow Scrapbook showed examples of his work in the Shadow pulps, and then had a modern picture of him painting Gerald Ford, which was amazing. Yeah.
There you go.
Crazy. Yeah. So forgive me, Al. I don't mean to match you on your story.
No, that's fine. He's a wonderful painter and illustrator, and apparently he was never embarrassed by the fact that he had drawn comic books. Some guys are.
I get it, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Who is that great EC artist who did the Master Race story? Bernie Krigstein.
Okay. Really? Bernie was embarrassed? Yeah.
He was embarrassed to have ever done comic books.
Wow.
Of course.
Tell me about what happened at the Christmas party at the Players Club.
Okay, so I was talking to Jim, and I just casually, Jim had a reputation of, if you worked with him on a job, if he would suddenly find faults in your work that he had never noticed before. And it could be detrimental to your career, because you went from being, hey, that guy's great, to, I don't understand, what kind of storytelling is this? Doesn't he understand what I'm trying to get across? That kind of thing. So it could become a negative. And we were, and I thought, because I was cocky in those days, somewhat, and I said, Jim, you and I never did a job together. I'd like to do it, because I'm curious to see, whether I could fulfill your tenets, for how you want stuff done. And I said, and we get along, so I'm sure we could do it without any animosity. And so he said, oh, no, Al, we'd be great together. I said, okay, good. So, and he said, come to think of it, I'm looking for an artist to take over the new Secret Wars series. And I said, really? And I knew it was the first one had been a great seller.
Yeah.
And, because, of course, it became like the linchpin of the company, because they had crossovers of every other title that linked into that series. And I said, wow. I said, but I thought Sal was doing that. He says, well, Sal did the first issue. I'm really not happy with it. We paid him for it, and I don't want you to get screwed out of first issue royalties or incentives, payments is, what they call it. And he says, so I would, if you're interested, we can work on that series together, and I'm going to have you redraw the first issue from scratch. And, just because he didn't want me to lose out on the royalties, which was a very nice gesture on his part. Sure. But I adore Sal and his work, and I didn't want him to get screwed. And he said, no, don't worry. Sal's taken care of. And he was, under contract to Marvel, making a very nice living. at the time, and as was his brother. And so I said, okay, great. So he's, now, of course, we've already lost a month lead time because Sal had drawn the first issue. So now I had to start it all over again. And I kind of leafed through it. I didn't want to look at it too closely because I didn't want to be influenced, especially since Jim wasn't happy with it.
Yeah, yeah.
But I then proceeded to draw the entire series under very, very strenuous deadline conditions. And they got Steve Aloha to finish my breakdowns. There's no way I could have done nice tight pencils for it. Steve is a terrific artist and inker, and he did yeoman service on it. And I thought my storytelling was good, but it certainly didn't hold up by any stretch to Mike Zeck's stint on the first one. And I really thought Sal did a perfectly fine job, and it would have ultimately looked better than what I ended up doing. And that's unfortunate. But I weathered the storm. I worked with Shooter. We got along great. Apparently, I misdrew something in one issue. He says, "Oh yeah, this character, you drew him as a black guy, but he was supposed to be Latino." And I said, "What?" He says, "Yeah, it's right there in the plot." And I think it was. I think I had just somehow glossed over it. So there was a character who was supposed to be one minority type, and I drew a different minority type. And Jim said, "Don't worry about it. I'll write around it." I said, "Well, good. That's the Marvel style." So he did not hold it against me, although he certainly could have. So again, my working relationship with Jim was quite good.
That's great, man. Honestly, I bet, much like me, while you're telling these stories, I pulled out my iPad, I grabbed Marvel Unlimited, and I'm looking at covers and pages that you did for Secret Wars 2. I noticed Joe Rubenstein was another inker on that series with Steve. At least he's credited as such.
Yeah, probably, the deadlines got heinous enough that they had to call in help. I don't remember if I myself did any inking on the series. And ironically, after stealing the job from Buscema, they got John Byrne to do the cover of the first one, which really galled me no end. Because
oh wow,
yeah. So
I go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I like doing the covers for the books I draw, but I was probably, because the deadline had become instantly tight. They probably said, "Well, Al's busy drawing the first issue. We got to get a cover out there for to promote it and sell it." And John was the hot property certainly at the time. He was the hottest artist in the biz, and so they got him. But man, I would have liked to have done it.
Well, dude, I'm looking at your cover for number 2 with the Beyonder totally glowing, surrounded by Iron Fist, Mr. Fantastic, Luke Cage, and She-Hulk, the Human Torch, Spider-Man in the black outfit, and there's the Invisible Woman. So pretty dynamic cover, Al. I got to tell you, and I like the interiors of what I'm looking at. So, honestly. And so, again, I love these stories, Al. You are really entertaining the hell out of us. And also, I wanted to ask, going back to Fanfare, did you draw those introductions where you would introduce the story?
Oh, yeah. Who else?
All right, I figured, but I wanted to ask. I wanted to confirm it. Yeah. They're fun.
Well,
man. That was my first exposure to your work, was you introducing Fanfare and everything. And it's like, oh, that's cool. And, oh, he's the editor. All right, great. And like I said in the last chapter of our conversation, you were like Rod Serling. All right, we're going to tell you a little story right now, kids. Everybody get together, and you're going to be blown away by this art, and you're going to be blown away by this story,
Well, and in fact, the reason for those was, where we broke off yesterday, I was talking about Fanfare and how I had proposed it as because I learned that we made no money off the advertising that we were using in the book.
Crazy.
But also because of the inception of the direct sales market, we could sell them to, at a higher price but also there was no danger of returns, because the way that's funny. The way the distribution worked, newsstand distribution, is they would print up, hundreds of thousands of copies, and then the distributor would take them to all their clients, all the drugstores and newsstands and mom and pop stores, wherever the comic books are sold, and they would stay on the stands for a finite period of time, probably, until the next issue of a title came out. And then they would take all the unsold copies, and initially they would return them for credit, and then that became too bulky and worrisome, so they would just tear off the covers and return those for credit. And that was then, they decided, too big of a pain in the ass. And so then they would just tear off the logos off the covers and return those. And then finally they said, this is not worth the effort. We'll just go on the honor system.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So tell them what happened, Al. Tell them what happened with the bulk comics that they tore off even the logo of the cover. What happened to those comics? Keep going. I know where it's going, but tell the people.
Yes. Well, some of them probably actually were either scrapped or returned, but a lot of them were then resold on some secondary market. With either the logo or the cover itself missing. And so if they were 10 or 12 cents cover price at the time, they'd sell them for a nickel. Yeah. And I know this because I once, in my quest to get early issues of the Fantastic Four, where the Marvel had very spotty distribution in those days, probably because they were being distributed by DC's distributors, who I'm sure didn't give a flying F about it. I mean, it was their job, but nonetheless. So the retailer would say, "Yeah, we sold. You gave us 100 copies of this book. We only sold 60." So they'd get credit for 40. Right. Well, now meanwhile, those 40 copies, they were supposed to destroy them, but as often as not, they'd find somebody who'd pay 2 or 3 cents each for them.
Oh yeah.
And then they would, and then those, there was a mom and pop shop in my area where they had comic books on sale with the logos torn off for a nickel.
Sure.
And as it happens, that's where I found my complete mint condition copy of Fantastic Four #5 with the first appearance of Dr. Doom. They had 2 copies of it. It had the logo. It had the cover. They were just as if you bought them. And I got them for a nickel each.
Wow. Because I was going to assume that maybe the cover was off or something, You see, I'm a little older, or a little younger, Al, and I remember when they would be in bags and 3 for a quarter.
Right.
Or whatever.
That was another way that they would manage to make money off the back end of the comic industry.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. I remember Whitman, and I assumed they had an agreement with Marvel and DC because they would also sell them like that intact. But I remember very distinctly seeing a lot of great 60s comics with the covers off that they would sell dirt cheap and everything, and I just wanted to read the story. I didn't care,
Exactly. And in my case, I got lucky and got a complete copy of that.
That's fantastic. So back to Fanfare and creating Fanfare for the direct market.
Well, and the thing was that the copies that they reported as unsold, they would receive full credit for, and they could apply it to their next order of comic books. So they didn't have, if they got 100 and only sold 60, they would get credit for the 40 that they didn't sell, and could use it towards their next order. And in the meantime, they were making, again, some pennies on the side by selling them.
Sure. Yeah.
In other venues where nobody could check up on them. So
absolutely. No, I love hearing about this period. You're right.
Yeah, it was quite a deal.
So Fanfare, like you said, it was a direct market product.
Yeah.
And for twice it was, as we discussed last time, 60 cents for the average comic, $1.25 for Marvel Fanfare when it debuted.
Correct.
And also beyond these amazing stories, great pinups and other beautiful portfolios where you spotlight one artist, but also a bunch of different artists, right? I mean, you know, so like was that easy to get from the artists and everything?
Get work from them?
Well, I mean, I guess it is just basically work, but yeah, like were they excited about, hey, I need someone to do a Valkyrie pinup for Fanfare? Do it.
I think because of the quality of the book, you know, and the better paper with the better printing and the better coloring we were capable of getting, I think a lot of guys were excited. And, you know, don't discount the fact that getting paid 1.5 times your normal rate is a great incentive, you know, and this, again, was before they were paying royalties. So yeah, I think that a lot of the art, and I think it was considered a premium product where, you know, you would be maybe honored to be asked to do it. You know, I never heard anybody say, I don't want to work for that rag, you know, so,
sure.
But I think it was a win-win situation all around, and the book sold very well initially. And it gave me I like to play around with the art end of it, you know, and the writers too, the stories, but it gave me a wide, you know, I could do some very offbeat and unorthodox stuff. I could use some artists who were either not well known or who had sort of unique or less commercial looking, let's put it that way, less commercial looking styles, you know, not necessarily the very slick, polished, you know, professional artwork that you're familiar with, but maybe had like a slightly different take. And I think I was very lucky and maybe a little good in getting work out of guys who ordinarily were not finding a lot of work in the business for whatever reason. For instance, you know, I mean, I discovered Paul Smith and got him working. I used an artist called Tony Salmons, like the fish, who had a very offbeat look to his stuff. It was not real polished looking, but the drawing was great and the storytelling was great and his composition was really interesting. Marvelous use of space. You know, not every panel was cluttered, you know, to a fare thee well. And this is not meant as a diss, but like say George Perez. If you get George Perez, you're going to get tons of detail in every single panel. Tony's stuff, you know, there was more breathing room, and I respected that and I liked it. And I don't know, I seem to recall him maybe doing some work up at Continuity Studios, Neil Adams and Dick Giordano's art studio that they had for comic and commercial work. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that, but I was aware of his work and liked it, and he did at least a couple of jobs for me. I think he did a Cloak and Dagger. I know he did a Daredevil. Oh, and there was a really nice Hulk story that he did where he really kind of went back to Kirby's original take on the character, the way he looked, the way he moved. And I, you know, being again a Kirby aficionado, I just loved what he did on that job. And because it, you know, had some nice negative space and open areas, the color looked really nice, you know, really beautiful. I thought Tony did great stuff. I got some work by Sandy Plunkett, who was one of the all-time great illustrators who's done so little in comic books. I have no idea how he ever made a living his whole life. If I ever run into him or you know, run into him online or something, I got to ask him how he survived all these years. Maybe he sells the originals and gets great money for them. He certainly deserves it. He did a Scarlet Witch and Spider-Man story for me. I don't remember if that was, you know, I commissioned the thing or if it was another thing I stole from Marvel Team Up. It seems like kind of a Marvel Team Up story. So
sounds
maybe
like an idea like that. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's got Spider-Man, so there's a good chance, you know.
Sure.
And I think, did he ink it himself or no? I think Craig Russell might have inked that one. And And by the way, there's a guy, one of the really brilliant illustrators in comics, Paul Craig Russell.
Couldn't agree more, man. I've had the pleasure of him on my show a couple times.
Oh,
and sweetheart of a guy.
Sweetheart of a guy, absolutely. Terrific. Yeah. And he, by the way, he plays piano like a concert pianist. He's fantastic.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Next time have him play a little ditty. But and Craig and I started virtually the same time in the industry. And not only is his drawing wonderful, and he's a opera aficionado. He loves opera,
wow.
And he's done a number of adaptations of operas in comic book form. The Magic Flute, I think he did. And I don't know.
Oh, yes, I did know that. Yes.
Yeah, he's done several of them, maybe many of them. And they're just beautiful to behold. So everybody run out and look it up online, and you can order one, I'm sure, or more. They're just great. And the other thing about Craig is, because he draws exceptionally well, he inks his own stuff. He also he has this beautiful ink line. I describe it as calligraphic. It's almost like each line has a character unto itself. As opposed to a normal professional qualified inker who does a nice slick line and knows how to do, the pen work and the brush work. Craig's stuff is so distinctive. I'm pretty sure I could recognize his inking style on any penciler. And he was one of my real go-to guys. If I had somebody who was either a really good penciler and I couldn't figure out who the hell would be appropriate to ink him, or somebody with a really offbeat style and I couldn't figure out who the hell to ink him, or somebody who was problematic in the pencils for whatever reason, I always ended up calling on Craig. And I was surprised, actually, how much work he had done for me. I think he inked that Sandy Plunkett job. He inked a Carmine Infantino Doctor Strange job. That was interesting. He inked a Marshall Rogers Doctor Strange job. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Right. And he did. Here's another inventory job that I, used up for Fanfare. It was Was it Weird World? Was that the name of it? With the dwarves, dwarves and elves and magic, and it was a sort of a Lord of the Rings influence series. They had a 3 or 4 issue series that, for whatever reason, I think they did like a magazine format of it, and this was like either earlier adventures or further adventures. The first one was drawn by Mike Plug, who was a terrific artist. Did very little work in comics. He did Man Thing, I believe. He did some Ghost Rider, I think, and some other stuff here and there. I think he do Werewolf by Night maybe early on. Anyway,
I believe that's right. But also he did the movie with Batchke, Wizards, and also DeMatteis in the early 2000s got him back in comics. And they did that fantasy book, Abatazad, that was really interesting.
I don't think I know that one.
No, I was stunned that he got him back to do comics because, Plug is amazing. Yeah. Yeah,
well, he's wonderful. And he, after his, fling in comic books, where he still probably did more work overall than Jim Steranko, he went off to Hollywood and was doing like designs and maybe storyboards and stuff. I don't really even know what his Hollywood career was, but clearly he was making a lot more money doing that than doing comics. Sure. But this Weird World, he drew the first issue, and so there I was, Mike Plug. Who else? Who could ink him? And I said, Craig Russell, and he did a spectacular job. And then the next 2 or 3 stories in the continuity, he was no longer available. Plug, and so, which really sounds like a sound effect for somebody falling in the swamp. I think if somebody falls in the swamp by accident, the sound effect would read Plug. So anyway, I hope Mike's not offended by that thought. He'd probably like it. Anyway, I actually inked him once on just a few pages of Cull the the Robert E. Howard character.
Yeah, Call the Conqueror, sure.
Call the Conqueror. He did a couple issues of that, I think, and I inked part of one of them, probably because, it was one of those emergencies. Beautiful stuff. I did okay. He actually said, "Oh, Al, I like what you did on me," and I was very happy to hear that because I liked his work so much. Anyway, and the rest of that storyline, however, was drawn by Pat Broderick, who does wonderful, detailed stuff and did a fine job. And I don't remember who inked it. I think maybe Bruce Patterson. It was not Craig, but Bruce Patterson, I think, inked one or possibly two. And I don't know who else. If I could, any good inker that I could lay my hands on, I got. But Craig Russell. Oh, and the other thing that he did that I thought was great was we had, and again, this was, I guess, technically inventory. Gil Kane at some point, who was, a brilliant comic book artist, as well as an art thief. But he also, he had a strained relationship with Marvel because he would voucher stuff that he hadn't done yet. And he would voucher stuff twice. And he would do things that drove the accounting department crazy and me crazy and Shooter crazy and so on. But a brilliant comic book artist, just great design. Yeah, draws great, designs great storyteller. As a talent, he was among the very best. Became, Marvel's preeminent cover guy when Kirby went over to DC, and he drew, he drew like dozens of comic book covers for Marvel every single month, and they were great, beautifully designed, very eye catching. Had a whole bunch of different inkers working on them. Well, he had aspirations to do greater things in comics than superheroes. And, he did that. His Name is Savage, a self-published thing that he did about I guess a private eye kind of character.
Private eye or a spy or something.
Spy something. Yeah, it was, like a James Bond looking action thing. And
like a Lee Marvin character as a James Bond spy.
The cover of the book was a painting, clearly of Lee Marvin, and I believe I think he got in trouble for that. By the way,
I bet he did.
I'm sure he didn't do the painting. I'm sure that he hired a painter. I don't think Gil was a capable painter. I don't know. I might be wrong.
Well, and it didn't look like Gil's art. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Well, he may have done the layout for the painted cover. I don't think he actually did it. And but he may have been sued over it later. And then he did that sci-fi newspaper strip, which was 2 tiers instead of a single 3-panel strip. What was
Star? What was
Star Hawks?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, amazing.
And he did that. So he kept trying to sort of expand the boundaries of comics, which I give him credit for that. And but he had drawn a multi-issue adaptation of the Jungle Book tales by Rudyard Kipling.
Oh wow!
And they were wonderful. They looked great. Gil's pencils I found problematic. I found them very hard to ink because he drew characters where the musculature, it looked like an anatomy lesson. It didn't look like they had flesh. But that was his style, and that's what he did. And
sure,
it was something he developed when he finally came over to Marvel from DC, because his DC stuff on Green Lantern and Atom and the sci-fi stuff in the 50s and 60s was very well drawn, and it was very well inked. And I don't know if he inked it himself, but it was well done, but pedestrian. It looked like the DC house style. And then, he came over to Marvel and he was inking his own stuff, and, it was certainly distinctive, and he studied his Kirby, who he had been a fan of anyway, and so he got very dynamic and much more distinctive looking. And, until later in his career, he was inking his own stuff using markers, which I thought was a terrible idea on many levels, but he still made it look good. I mean, he was that damn good. But here I had these 4 Mowgli stories, Mowgli the Jungle Boy, with all the raised by wolves and and he could talk to all the animals, and wonderful, charming tales, and and there were good animals and bad animals and so on and so forth. And I found these in a drawer, and I don't remember if he had plotted them or scripted them. I mean, they were taken right from the original stories, I believe. But so here I have like a 4-part story, I think it was, by Gil Kane, just languishing in a drawer somewhere. And I said, man, okay, I got to get these scripted and lettered, and who could I get to ink them? Who has a good illustrative style? Who do I know who can ink anybody and would do a nice job on Gil Kane? And then I said, well, of course, Craig Russell, because he was the guy I used for anything difficult. And he just did a terrific job, and they colored up beautifully. And I'm very proud of those also. And, the dyed-in-the-wool comic book superhero fans, I don't know what they thought of that series, but I thought it was a credit to the title. I thought it was just, stuff that should be published, and I was glad I was the one to get to publish it.
That's really cool. And Marvel put that stuff out?
Yes, I'm assuming they either had the rights or it was public domain by this time.
Sure.
So so we could rip off Rudyard Kipling's heirs.
Well, that's like Scotty Young for years with Eric Schanauer was doing the L. Frank Baum Oz books in the 2000s. And you're right. I mean, and people are like, Scotty, we miss you on the X-Men and all the superhero stuff. And Scotty's like, I'm having the time of my life adapting L. Frank Baum. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So, no, I get it, man. That's great. That's fantastic.
Oh, I just pulled up Secret Wars 2 on my iPad, and yeah, that's a pretty good cover.
Yeah, man. Oh my God, yes, absolutely. No, there's several of them that you and a couple as the series went on that you and Steve, I think, co-did and everything, and maybe he did the finishes or whatever. I see his name on some of the credits of the later issues.
Yeah, on my covers I would do full pencils.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
So
very cool.
Because it was just one page, I could take the time. But by the way, I never finished saying that on Fanfare. Once Shooter was breathing down my neck to get the damn thing put together so we could publish it. He said, Al, you should really do an editorial in each issue to tell the fans, what you were thinking and where the stuff comes from, and which. And I just blanched because I don't know how many typewritten pages it would take to fill an entire comic book page of copy, but I was not eager to take that on. And I thought about it, and I went, and I put a little note on a page, editorial, and then I said, hey, wait a minute, editorial. Let me put a dash in there, so it became Editorial. And I said, Jim. I said, Jim, could I do those as a cartoon strip? And he said, I don't see why not, So, and he actually, he also had a page in the early fanfares, I believe, Shooter's, shooting from the hip or something. I don't remember what it was, but it was there. And, and that was a full page of typewritten stuff. So I was always loath to read stuff in a comic book that was not comic material. I didn't read some of the letter columns I would read, but not always. And some soapboxes and stuff I would read. And I don't think I ever read the in the early days when you had to have a page of written material to get second-class mailing privileges or something.
Yes, the text pieces that were in the Golden Age comics.
Yeah, it would be like a 1 or 2 page little fictional story or something.
Yes.
Or educational things like, in the Flash comics. The fastest animals on Earth, the cheetah can run up to 90 miles an hour. The rhea, some kind of bird could run 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. All those little filler things, absolutely.
Yeah, right. But and if they were in comic form, I would read them. But if they were text, I very rarely would. So I said, okay, I'm going to go do a strip, and and so that was fun for me, and I did it. And a lot of people, the first one I did, they said, "Oh, Al, you're what are you doing, Harvey Kurtzman?" And I actually was not. I knew of Harvey Kurtzman. I knew his name. I didn't know. I had no idea what his drawing looked like. And I found out later he had these little one-page strips he would do called, I think, "Hey You," and sure enough, they were not dissimilar from what I was doing.
Right.
Harvey Kurtzman's a genius, and I'm just a schlep. But he was, but I could see it. I mean, I was because I just, it was simple, it was cartoony, it was exaggerated, and so I developed a style to suit that. And then I had, and after the first 3 or 4 issues, it became a huge chore because
really?
I had to come. It was always the last thing I did in every single issue of Fanfare before it went to press. I'd have to sit down and lay it out and then come up with what I hoped was a funny idea, funny concept. And I did the Ditko 9-panel a page grid for the most part.
Yes.
And I find, I like that because you can keep it simple and not have to get overly elaborate. And I didn't want to in that format anyway. But but I think I reread them now, and I'm pretty amused myself. I amuse myself.
They're great.
I'm laughing at my own jokes, and then I had a little side career in the years following, doing editorial for reprints of Starlin stuff, or my stuff, or various collected editions. If people would call up and say, "Hey, Al, can you want to do an introduction for such and such?" And I'd always say, "Can I do it as an editorial?" And usually they'd say yes. Sometimes they'd say no. And I think it may have had to do with the budget, although I was willing to do it on a cheaper, because they had to pay for script, penciling, and inking of a comic book. And I think normally paying like an actual writer to do a page of just typewritten stuff was probably cheaper. So, and it's more, personal to me. That's my, that's the thing I'm known for. So I thought, if I'm doing the introduction, let me do one of these babies. So, anyway, so even now, even on these reprint, omnibuses, or is it omnibuy that Marvel's publishing, I'm doing a new 2-page editorial for each edition.
Hey, that's great. Oh, that's so great to hear. And honestly, at the same time, that's when Fred Hembeck was doing his fun, little comic things. And that's what I equated what you were doing with. And I'm it's great. It's another guy doing funny stuff. Absolutely. This is good.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I like Fred's stuff is great. And they will also get him to do, funny introductions to various things. They had didn't they have a Fantastic Four roast where he was the framing artist for everybody else?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Oh no, and I loved all the strips that he did for both DC and Marvel over the years. I'm kicking myself out. I really, sooner than later, I got to get Fred on the show because I've always adored his work and everything. We're Facebook friends. He's amazing. Yeah, brilliant guy. Brilliant guy.
Yeah, and he's got, I don't know if he makes his living drawing. I assume he may have a side job, a real job, as it were. But I always thought his stuff was a lot of fun and very, interesting to read and funny. And so I very carefully avoided drawing curly cues on everybody's knees and elbows.
Or like the flapping feet that Don Martin used to put people on in Mad Magazine, too.
Right, yeah. So anyway, and it's nice because I actually did do, somebody hired me to do reviews or critiques of several independent comics that that were being published, and he sent me a whole stack of them, and I wanted to make sure. I had once checked with Shooter. I said, look, I don't want Marvel to own my caricature. I don't want them to own my likeness. And he said, I understand that. I said, I'm doing editorial. I'd like to be able to use that caricature, anytime I want. He says, Al, I can't imagine Marvel wants to own you, per se. And he said, look, if it comes down to it, we'll lease the character to you for like $1 a year. And I said, okay, great. So I went ahead and I did the series of these reviews of various. I must have been 7, 8, 9 of the damn things. I had to read through them all. I got paid a little bit. I got paid some money, but not much. But the guy also, he said, look, I want you to do like half a dozen sketches of yourself. Because I said, what I'm going to do is I think we're going to call it Critic Al. And we'll, and I'll be critical of these publications. And I wrote, reviews to the best of my ability. And, and he used different, caricatures of me in each review, I think. And it, it turned out really well. And now, I use it whenever I get the chance.
That's fantastic, man. And well deserved. Yeah. That's great. That's great to hear. Al, you've been amazing with your time. And my God, can I mean, obviously, and I should mention, we're going to do a panel at Terrificon, and this will come out well before that.
Yeah.
But, and we'll certainly talk more about yours and Jim's collaborations in the cosmic world that went on for, a long, long time. And I know you were involved with a lot of the Infinity miniseries that came out during the 90s and things like that. But there is so much else of your comic career that we haven't even touched. Can I bug you like 6 months down the line or next year or something, and we can talk more about some of this stuff? Is that okay?
It's okay on one condition.
Talk to me.
Okay. I keep forgetting to do this, but when I go, I've done a number of podcasts now, and
I'm sure.
I'd like to plug myself.
Of course.
I would like to give out my email address.
Please.
Because I have no online presence to speak of. I don't have a website or anything like that. But I am available to do commissions at reasonable rates. Or if you don't go to shows and you need something autographed, I'm willing to work through the mails. So I will now read off my email address. And if you put in the subject line, commission, or I heard you on John,
word balloon.
Yeah, word podcast balloon. Or whatever. And you want to contact me, I will send you a list of my rates. And if you want some an original drawing by good old Editorial, then it is possible to obtain them. So now I will say it. And by the way, you might want to put it up at the top of the podcast also. Say, hey, Al wants to let you guys know, and give it then also. But
it would be my pleasure.
Here it is. It's Editorial 4 at AOL.com. Now I will spell that. It's EDITORIAL 4. That's the numeral, not spelled out. Editorial 4 at AOL.com. All right. So, if you need a nice little drawing to patch up a hole in your wall, cover it somewhere. I'm the guy to see. I'm probably cheaper than a spackle and paint job.
That's fantastic, Al, and I'm really glad that you are still doing it, and I'm glad that people are hitting you up on those kind of opportunities. And I'm very happy to promote this for you. So I got a few thousand listeners, so that's good. They're
that many? Okay, I was figuring maybe 42.
10.
But thousands is good. Thousands I might have to get a couple
not
of
bad.
commissions. Yeah, excellent.
Well, I've been doing the podcast for 20 years now, Al, and I'm so sorry that it's taken this long to get you solo. We did a panel with Master of Kung Fu. I'm blanking now. The artist.
Galassi?
Galassi, Paul. Yeah, me, you, and Paul did one. At Terrificon a couple of years ago. But I'm looking forward to you with Starlin. And it is so great because you'll have to retell people about the fact that you guys have been friends since junior high. That's amazing. And that you came into the biz together and everything. And then we'll get into the cosmic stuff. So, no, it excites me even more to have this panel with you in a couple of weeks. So,
okay, well,
thank you.
I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Well, thank you again. I'll shake your hand in person, but thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing.
Oh, my pleasure, John. And I think I'm also doing I believe they're doing a tribute panel to Jim Shooter.
Yes, and I wasn't certain because I don't know who's on it and who isn't. So I'm glad if you're on it. That's great too. And I'm really, really excited about this year. Every year, Terrificon puts on great programming, and I'm not just saying that because they're a sponsor, but no, Mitch has become a good friend over the years.
Yeah.
And I am always thrilled with the opportunities. That was my one opportunity talking to Shooter, was on Terrificon. And I treasure it, and I'm glad that I had that opportunity. And I'm sad that he's not with us anymore, because I had a million more questions, but at least I got an hour out of him. You know.
And Jim had a great memory.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes he remembered it his way a little more than I remembered it, but that's human nature. And I had spoken to him a few months back, and I knew that he had a problem, that he had ill health, esophageal cancer.
Wow.
And I was hoping he could beat it. And then I saw him at the one-day show, the Little Giant Comic-Con in New Hampshire, and he looked very gaunt and he lost a ton of weight. But he was in good spirits, and we had a great chat. And I had talked to him just prior to the show, because I knew he wasn't doing well. I wanted to call and talk. And I saw the young lady who was repping him at the time, Brittany, her name is, and a really nice and cute as hell young lady. And and she was kind of watching out for him and making sure he got around and so on. He was in a wheelchair.
Wow.
Just because he was so weak, but
sure. Yeah.
And I saw her at another show, and she said, "Oh, Al, you ought to really give Jim a call." I said, "How's he doing?" She goes, "He's struggling." I said, "Okay, I definitely will." And I saw that he was supposed to show up at the Heroes Con in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, that's good. I'll see him there, and then I'll try to call him on a more regular basis. And he didn't come to the show because apparently he was too weak. And I said, oh, I really, and I literally, I had a list, I had a to-do list of 2 or 3, commissions I had to finish for people from that show, but also, very close to the top was call Jim and, see how he's doing, try to cheer him up a little, that kind of thing. And then like literally a day later, he had passed away. And I said, oh man, why was I hesitating? Why did I should have called him like ASAP. And I feel bad that I didn't get at least one last chance to talk with him. But the last time I did see him, I got a couple laughs out of him. We, took our usual stroll down memory lane, and I think he knew he was, appreciated by a lot of people.
That's great. That's great to hear. And yes, I mean, an amazing force, and I understand the divisive force depending on who you talk to, including some people that will be at Terrificon and probably won't be on that tribute panel. But that's okay. I mean, people are complicated,
It's true, and he was in a position where people, it's a tough job being the boss, and
absolutely.
And he did he did some great things at Marvel and some great things for freelancers in general.
No question.
He when DC threatened to pay royalties, he got Marvel to match the deal, even though it was going to cost Marvel a lot more money than it was going to cost DC in the instance, because our books, sales were higher and the royalties would have been much greater. But he convinced him that. He made it clear that he thought the artists should be getting their artwork back. I think that was in great part due to his pushing. I don't remember if it was anything earlier than that or not. But and he. He said, I don't want any of the people working for me to wind up like Siegel and Schuster, where they create a character who ends up being a valuable property, and they're still struggling and working, page rates to make a living.
Sure.
And I thought that showed a good sense of history and a good sense of fair play. And he did, in fact, get a thing in place called the New Character Agreements, which every time you created a new character, Marvel would send you a paper, and it said that you would have a certain amount of participation in any future, ancillary products using your characters that you'd created. So if he was in a movie or a TV show or a video game or a bobblehead or lunchboxes, whatever it might be, coloring books, you would get a piece of the action. And Yeah, and actually now Disney is doing their damnedest to retrofit that so that it's no longer the case, because they bought Marvel and they assumed that they now owned everything, lock, stock, and barrel, but they didn't take into account these new character agreements. So,
well, and even further, as I understood it, Quesada had to talk to the Disney guys when Joe was still the editor-in-chief and explain guys like yourself that are allowed to continually do commissions and recreations of Marvel characters without any kickback to Disney or anything. And,
right.
Joe had to make that explanation. And listen, again, I'm not trying to make apologies for corporations, but they have kind of these faceless, monolithic things of, well, we didn't make that deal. Why should we be beholden to it? So it's tough, and you need guys like Quesada and Shooter to explain to the upstairs people, no, you really need to do this, and it's always been, okay, or this is something new to introduce where these guys deserve it. They're the creators of this stuff. And I know Lovitz was like that at DC as well, as long as he was publisher.
Yeah.
So it's tough, and I'm glad there are lawyers out there that are making sure guys are getting compensated for the things they created. So I don't remember the one guy's name, but I know Chaikin and a few others have used the same lawyer over the years to kind of go, actually I created that and I deserve some sort of money.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, what happened with Disney is that they have now crafted a new what's called a special character agreement, which supersedes the new character agreement, but you have to sign off on it. And I know there have been a number. I think Disney realized when the first Avengers movie came out and Thanos appeared in the very last scene of the movie, well, nearly the last scene, and I'm sure Disney was going, what a deal! We bought this company for $3 billion, and look at that, we're going to make it back in the very first movie, And then probably somebody said, well, of course, Starlin's going to get some of that. And they went, what is this Starlin you're talking about? And they said, well, he created Thanos. Oh, well, yeah, but we own Thanos. Well, yeah, but Jim signed this new character agreement with Marvel in the old days, which entitles him to, a piece of that action. And I'm sure Disney was just horrified.
Sure.
So now, I know that I don't know the details, but I know that both he and Simonson, who created the Dark Elf, who appeared in the second Thor movie, Disney just went ahead and made the movies. Didn't ever check to see that, because why would they assume that anybody else had any rights? And so they had a lawyer, and they negotiated a settlement, and they both tell me they were very satisfied, which good for them. But, they had the advantage of, the stuff was already used in the movies. So, no backseats, so, so now, Disney does want, they're trying to get everybody who worked for Marvel in the day to sign these special character agreements.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Man, no, great insight, Al. I appreciate it, man. Yeah.
Yep.
Jeez. Well, again, I feel like I'm keeping you from dinner or something. I don't know.
No, we're going shortly, but so far you're still under the wire.
All right, beautiful.
I do go on, as they say.
Al, do not even consider this like, oh, I'm sorry if I'm, tangents and everything. That is one of the greatest things about my show. And truly, the great thing is my listeners and viewers will then come to you and say, hey, I heard about this thing that you talked about on Word Balloon, and it's the greatest compliment to my show. But it's just, no, they love this. And truly, the stories you told about the Golden Age artists and everything and all this stuff, and especially even this special character stuff at Disney right here at the end. No, this is great inside information that I think, because a lot of times, somebody watches a movie or reads a comic and assumes, oh, well, of course, Len Wein needed to get Hugh Jackman embarrassing Disney, pointing to Len Wein at the premiere of Logan and saying, I would not be on this stage if it wasn't for this man, the man who created Wolverine. And it's like, yeah. And thank God they took care of Len before he passed away. God bless him.
That's good to hear. That's another guy. I can't believe he's gone so young. But
yeah. Oh yeah.
That is one nice thing. There's a lawyer who has helped me in some other scenarios named Lawrence Klein. And Lawrence, he knows the business. He's a fan. And he, I know he's worked with Dave, Patty Cockrum, Dave Cockrum's widow.
Yeah.
And Bill Mantlo, who is unfortunately brain damaged and can't really function in the real world. And his brother was his caretaker for many years, but he passed away within the last few years, I believe. So, but he has done, I think, a lot of work on the part of these people who would really be, fall through the cracks. Who created? I mean, Mantlo created a lot of stuff for Marvel.
Oh yeah.
By a happy coincidence, has gone on to movie success. Rocket Raccoon, of course, is his. And there's many others. And I think Bill. Well, Bill was that's actually one of the stories I usually tell about Bill being the writer on the first penciling job that Mike Mignola did, because Mike wanted to be an inker, and I said, "What's wrong with you? Nobody wants to be an inker." And he did get a couple of inking jobs up at Marvel, and then he didn't get any follow-up jobs. And the inking he did was okay, but it wasn't great. And I said, listen, Mike, the reason you got these inking jobs is because your samples look terrific, and the samples are all your pencils inked by you. So it's that you didn't do anything to embellish these other pencilers, but your own samples are great. I said, why don't you, And he was, I can't make a living, and New York is so expensive. I'm from the West Coast, blah blah blah. I said, so listen, stop fighting me. I want you to do some penciling, and so I said, do a job for me for Marvel Fanfare, and it pays rate and a half, so it'll be good money. And then he said, well, I don't like superheroes. I said, oh, come on, Bill. I said, I said, I'll tailor it to your every design. Tell me what you want to draw, and I will do it. I'll get a story for you that just hits all your strong suits. So he said, well, I don't like superheroes. I said, it's Marvel Comics. What? That's all we do with superheroes. What you don't like? I said, come on, man, work with me here. I said, there must be somebody there. Something drew you to the comics industry and made you want to even just be an inker. There must be a character. He goes, well, I kind of like Submariner. I said, okay, I get it. He doesn't wear the cape and the trunks, but he's, so he's, sometimes more of an anti-hero. I said, what else? He says, I like drawing animals. I said, great. Nobody likes to draw animals, but good for you. I said, anything else? He goes, sorcery, magic, something. I said, okay. And I said, go home. I'll call you. And I called up Bill Mantlo, and I said, Bill, I need you to do a 10-page story for Fanfare. I got this reluctant young artist. He's a pain in my ass, but he's really talented. And, I said, I need the Submariner, animals, and sorcery. And he didn't say, what the hell are you talking about? He said, okay, Al. and he hung up, and a few days later, he comes into the office with this great plot for a 10-page Submariner story. I won't go into it now because we may do another podcast in the future. But but the bottom line is, it was a wonderful little story. Mike drew the hell out of it. Bill scripted it, got it lettered. Mike came in, picked it up, took it home, inked it, looked great. And I said, Mike, how do you feel about that? He says, I really enjoyed that. I said, good. Want to do more? And he said, yeah, I do. So I said, okay. I said, listen, so you want another subby story? He says, yeah, Submariner is good. I said, go home, I'll call you. And I called Bill up, and I said, Bill, can you do me another Submariner story for that pain in my ass Mike Mignola? And he said, yeah. He says, and that he did a really nice job on that. I said, I know, and he wants to be an inker. And Bill said, what? Nobody wants to be an inker. Anyway, so they did another one, and now I called up Mike to come in and get it so he could ink it, and he said, I don't want to ink it. And I said, you're killing me. You don't want to ink it. You want it to be an inker. So here, ink yourself. He goes, no, I penciled it really tight, and I feel like I'd just be repeating myself. I said, okay, 8.5, Marvel Fanfare. No. I said, okay, suit yourself. So I got Craig Russell to ink it, by the way. And
wow.
so, so there you go. Another very good artist that he did a beautiful job inking. And
sure.
now Bill calls me up and says, Al, that Mignola guy, I really like his stuff. He did such a nice job on those subby stories. He said, I've been wanting to do a Rocket Raccoon miniseries. I said, who the hell is Rocket Raccoon? I don't know if maybe I'd already drawn him on that. Yeah, I must have drawn him on that Hulk cover. So I did know the character. But, Bill created him in one of the black and white magazines with Starhawk and whatever else. And I said, really? Rocket Raccoon gets his own series? He goes, yeah, I think it'd be great. So he, we got hold of Mike. We said, Mike, Bill wants to work with you on this series, and it's got animals, which we know you love to draw. And he says, oh yeah. So he did it, and it was terrific. It looked great. And, and then, Mike is off and running. He becomes a superstar. He was laying out the Hulk. He was doing covers for Marvel. He's doing covers for DC. He might have, I don't know if he ticked off Bob Harris because he was doing covers for DC, but I know he was doing some of the X-book covers at Marvel and so on. And the next thing you know, he's over at Dark Horse and doing creator-owned stuff and creates, Hellboy. And, I assume he's now making a lot of money off the movies. So I hope so anyway.
Oh,
so
no,
anyway,
and he's still doing stuff, and he's still writing a lot.
Yeah.
He doesn't draw as much as he used to, but he certainly does a lot of writing still. No, I that's fantastic. Outstanding,
yeah.
man.
So there's another one of the guys I gave their first job to. There's others. I gave Rick Leonardi his first job. I gave Kevin Nolan his first job.
Wow.
I like to say, this will be the last comment, but I like to say that I got so many really talented young artists into the business. Oh, Brett Blevins was another guy I worked with early on.
Wow.
And gave him,
Kevin and Brett are going to be at Terrificon with you, so that's cool.
Yeah, always, and to a certain degree, I was responsible for Ron Friends.
Oh wow!
Yeah, well, Shooter went to a show in Pittsburgh, came back with his samples, and I said, "This guy's really good." He goes, "Yeah, he does animation. He works for an animation studio there." And one time, I think Wheezy needed an artist for an issue, and nobody seemed to be available. And I said, "Wait a minute, I got pages in the drawer," and I hauled out these Ron Friends pages. He said, "Oh yeah, he's good." And so he did a job for her, and then countless jobs for Marvel over the years. So yeah, all these guys, but what I say is I got so many talented artists into the business that they no longer had any room in it for me. So out I went. That's only half in jest.
I understand, man, and believe me, I've started people in radio that have surpassed me in their broadcasting careers, so I get it.
There you
believe
go.
Me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, outstanding, Al. Outstanding. Yeah. Well, seriously, man, this is great. I really, really appreciate it. My God, Al, this is it's gonna be like I think almost a 4-part podcast because of the directions we went into, but all great. And
okay.
Looking forward to see you in 2 weeks at Terrificon. And
all right,
really, thanks for your
and be sure to give if you're breaking this down into multi podcasts, give my solicitation for commissions at each one, please.
You got it. I'm happy to do that, Al.
Got to keep my hand in. Thanks a lot, man.
Oh, 100%, man. No, we want you out there, and the fans want you out there, and it's great to know that they can still get great work from Al Milgrom. So thank you.
Okay, well, I appreciate the compliment, and thank you very much.